Tonight we're diving back into the soot-stained, fog-choked streets of Victorian Britain, a place where the coal burns hot, the butter is questionable, and your chances of survival are pretty slim. No, I'm serious. If you were born in London's East End back in 1850, your odds of even seeing your 5th birthday weren't exactly great. But since you're just a ghost riding along with me on this little journey, let's try to enjoy the scenery. Before we get settled in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy the stories I tell here. Also, drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments below, as I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. Now go ahead and dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that soft, ambient hum, and let's ease into tonight's trip together. You wake up long before the sun even thinks about rising, because honestly, the sun doesn't really rise properly here anyway. The light just kind of seeps in through the soot-streaked glass like a tired ghost, all dim and jaundiced, choked out by that thick, yellow fog London is so famous or infamous for. Your first breath of the morning is a mix of cold dust, damp bricks, and the faint, lingering smell of cabbage that was boiled 2 doors down. The bed you're in is narrow and impossibly lumpy, and you're sharing it with at least 2 of your siblings. You've been using the same wool blanket for as long as you can remember, and believe me, it has seen some things. The floorboards groan as you roll off the mattress, and the sharp chill of the unheated room bites at your bare toes. The fireplace is cold and barren. The fire hasn't been lit for days because there's no wood left. A bundle of kindling or a bit of coal costs more than what your father made yesterday, hawking shoe polish in the freezing rain. You pull your shirt on over your head, the fabric stiff from drying near the stove yesterday. Your trousers are just a little too short, since they were originally made for someone younger, maybe a cousin from 5 years ago. Everyone here reuses clothing until it falls apart. Everyone smells a little bit like laundry water that's been left in a bucket for too long. You splash your face with water from the basin, but it's ice cold and hasn't been changed since yesterday morning. Out on the street, the fog seems to swallow both sound and light. Horse-drawn carts creak past, their drivers hunched over in heavy coats, their boots crusted with a mixture of mud and manure. A street sweeper is already hard at work with a broom that's more handle than bristle at this point. You have to dodge a steaming pile of something you'd rather not inspect too closely. The street lamps, fed by gas and flickering weakly, cast more shadows than they do actual light. You walk past endless rows of identical brick buildings, packed so tightly together that you can hear your neighbor coughing, or maybe dying, depending on how their week has been going. The windows are warped with age, many of them cracked, with a few stuffed with old rags to keep the biting wind out. Laundry hangs limply between the buildings, suspended on frayed ropes that sag under the weight of wet undergarments. At the corner, a woman with pinched cheeks is already out selling roasted chestnuts, the smell of them oddly sweet in the bitter morning air. Just behind her, a little match girl is crouched on the curb, half swallowed by the shadows, her face streaked with soot and pink from the cold. Her tiny fingers tremble as she lights another match, probably more for warmth than for any hope of making a sale. If you're one of the lucky ones who has worked today, then you are already running late. Maybe you are headed to a textile mill, where the looms rumble like caged monsters and fingers are sometimes gobbled up for moving too slowly. Or perhaps you're off to the docks, where men scream directions over the constant clatter of barrels and crates being loaded and unloaded. Maybe you clean chimneys for a living, and if you do, I'm truly sorry. You're likely small and thin and covered in more soot than is medically advisable for any human being. If you're not working, then you're begging, or maybe running errands for the woman at the corner shop in exchange for a few crumbs and a boiled sweet. The shop smells of stale bread, sharp vinegar, and the overpowering reek of pickled onions. You hold your breath whenever you walk in, even though it's much warmer inside than it is out on the street. You hear a man calling out "rags, bones," as the rag and bone man makes his rounds, collecting junk, animal parts, and scrap metal. He throws it all onto his cart right beside a very sad-looking horse. You wonder for a moment what he does with all the bones he collects. Then you quickly realize you would probably rather not know the answer. In the distance, a church bell tolls the hour. Somewhere nearby, a baby starts wailing, a dog barks, and a child coughs deeply from a second-story window, a cough that doesn't stop for a long, long time. You might think that life in Victorian England is all about lace, parasols, and fancy tea parties, but that's only if you're reading a novel or looking at a painting owned by a rich person. Down here, in the thick of it all, life is much more about simple survival. It's about pushing through each damp, gray day without catching something that will turn your lungs inside out. Here's a little historical fact for you. In 1873, the death rate in London was hovering around 24 per 1,000 people, which is incredibly high. That's like every other street losing a few of its residents by the time spring arrives. And while Queen Victoria was busy rebranding the British Empire with her stern portraits and pearly earrings, most people like you, were just trying to stay warm and find enough to eat. And here's a weird little fringe fact for your sleepy brain to chew on for a moment. Some people actually believed the fog had a personality. They would give it names, describe it as if it were a living creature, and say that it came to visit the city, bringing with it sadness, theft, and even madness. Victorian newspapers often wrote about the fog as if it were a local villain, calling it thick, yellow, and creeping. And honestly, you can kind of see why. Now, scholars still argue over just how much the average poor person truly suffered back then. Some records suggest that despite all the filth and hunger, people formed incredibly strong communities, found joy in small, everyday rituals, and had better emotional resilience than we often give them credit for. Others argue that we have a tendency to romanticize hardship too much, glossing over the grinding despair that would swallow you whole if you ever stopped moving long enough to think about it. But don't you worry, you don't really have time to think. The street's already buzzing with activity, there's work to be done, mouths to feed, and boots that need patching. So you just pull your thin coat a little tighter, duck your head against the wind, and head off into the fog, your lungs already stinging. Just another perfectly normal morning. The first real choice of the day comes at you fast. Do you want to be cold and free, or warm and suffocating? Because now it's time to get properly dressed, and that means layers, so many layers, all of them designed for a life where central heating is a fantasy, and the idea of breathable fabric hasn't been invented yet. Your fingers, still stiff from the morning's chill, fumble with the buttons on your shirt, and every single item you pull on seems determined to itch, scratch, or strangle you. Let's be perfectly honest, clothing isn't about comfort here. It's about social order, survival, and the constant performance of looking respectable. Even if you're completely broke, even if your boots are held together with nothing but twine and last winter's fatting hope, you absolutely must look presentable. That means tight collars, corsets, and waistcoats that cinch you in with the enthusiasm of a hungry python. If you're a woman, you start by pulling on your chemise, a thin underlayer that's supposed to protect your skin from the harsher fabrics that are coming next. Spoiler alert, it doesn't really work. Over that comes the corset, the unholy centerpiece of Victorian fashion. It's made of stiff fabric lined with whalebone or steel stays, and is laced up the back by someone who does not care how many of your ribs you'd like to keep. It's not about feeling good, it's about posture, status, and achieving a waistline under 20 inches. You exhale, and it bites into you even deeper, like hugging a wooden fence that strongly disapproves of your entire lifestyle. Next up is the petticoat, or maybe 2 or 3, possibly even 4 if it's a Sunday and you're trying to impress someone at church. They rustle whenever you walk, and they trap every single ounce of body heat in a way that makes summer absolutely miserable and winter just slightly less murderous. Then comes the dress itself, which might be made of wool, cotton, or something a tailor found in the scrap bin. If you're working class, the colors are muted, like blues, browns, or maybe a faded maroon if you're feeling particularly adventurous. Now for men, the process is a little less exhausting, but it's no more forgiving. You start with an undershirt, then a collared shirt that's possibly starched and definitely scratchy. Over that goes the waistcoat, snug and buttoned with care, because heaven forbid your shirt shows any signs of effort or movement. Then come the trousers, usually held up with braces because belts are still not quite in fashion yet. And finally, the jacket, even if it's threadbare, even if it's seen one too many puddles, you wear it. It's all about respectability. Shoes, well, that's assuming you have any to begin with. If you do, they're likely stiff leather boots, probably hand-me-downs from someone who had slightly different-sized feet. If the soles are still intact, you're considered lucky. If they leak, you're just normal. Socks are either optional, mismatched, or have been darned into oblivion. And of course, there's the hat. Hats are completely non-negotiable. Men wear flat caps or bowlers if they're lucky, or they just wrap their heads in scarves to fake the look. Women wear bonnets or headscarves that are pinned on carefully, and even the children wear tiny versions of adult hats. If you leave the house without something on your head, you might as well just announce to the world that you've lost your moral compass and possibly your mind. Under all these layers, your body just sort of vanishes. Victorian clothing isn't about expressing yourself. It's about hiding your skin, your shape, your individuality. You become a silhouette, something generic and proper, a walking paper doll dressed up by a society that is terrified of ankles. Here's a little historical nugget for you. The average working-class woman spent over 30 minutes just getting dressed. That might not sound like much, but you have to remember she's also feeding children, lighting the stove, hauling water, and possibly sewing a patch onto her husband's only shirt all at the same time. And if you were rich, getting dressed was a major event. It required a lady's maid, a very specific order of garments, and a dramatic standing pose while someone else did all the work. You would just have to raise your arms and hope your corset didn't make you pass out. Now, here's the weird part. In the late 1800s, there were actually underground societies of fashion reformers who protested the restrictive nature of Victorian clothing. They held secret meetings, passed around scandalous pamphlets, and even wore bloomers under loose tunics as a form of political statement. Imagine risking social exile just for the chance to breathe a little easier. It's wild. And yes, there's still a scholarly debate about just how universal these clothing norms really were. Some historians argue that many working-class women didn't even bother with corsets day to day, because they were too busy hauling coal or bending over a wash tub. Others claim that the pressure to conform was so intense that women would rather faint in the street than be caught without their proper stays. It probably just depended on your neighborhood, your mother-in-law, and how many times you'd been publicly shamed for showing your elbows. Either way, now you're dressed, or more accurately, you're armored. Your movements are a little stiffer now, your breathing is a bit more shallow, but you look decent, respectable, alive, even if you are a little gray around the edges. You catch your reflection in a cracked piece of mirror on the wall, seeing a smudged face, sunken cheeks and eyes that are already tired, and you try not to think about how heavy all this fabric feels. Outside, the fog still hasn't lifted. You open the door and the cold air bites at your eyes, but your clothes trap just enough warmth to get you to the next corner. A neighbor gives you a nod. You nod back, because these small gestures are what keep things civil. You hear someone swearing from an upstairs window, a child cries, a vendor hawks ribbons, though it doesn't look like anyone's buying. Your boots clack against the cobblestones, slick with grime and melted frost. The wind whips at your coat and lifts the edge of your scarf. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistles, and for just a second, you imagine what it would be like to ride it far, far away from here. But there's no time to daydream. You're dressed, you're presentable, you're out the door, and that's the first victory of the day. Breakfast, if you can even call it that, is more about routine than it is about satisfaction. You step into the cramped, dim kitchen space, though calling it a kitchen is a generous term. It's really just one corner of the single room you call home, with a hearth and maybe a wooden table that has one leg not quite reaching the floor. The air smells faintly of smoke, mildew, and whatever was scraped together for last night's supper. If you're lucky, someone has already managed to boil some water, and the tea, always the tea, is steeping in a chipped pot that's older than you are. Victorian tea is non-negotiable. Even the poorest households scrape together enough for it. It's a comfort, a stimulant, and a ritual all wrapped up in one cracked ceramic cup. This isn't the fancy kind with cream and cakes that you see in paintings of drawing rooms with doilies and bored duchesses. This is industrial-grade tea, cheap and dark, brewed strong enough to strip the lining from your tongue. You pour it into a mismatched mug, maybe with a dollop of watered-down milk if someone managed to afford it this week. Sugar is only an option if it's been rationed carefully, or if someone traded for a few precious cubes from the corner shop. Alongside the tea, you might get a slice of bread. There's no butter, unless it's butter in the loose Victorian sense, which could mean a scrap of margarine, rendered fat, or something spreadable that vaguely resembles dairy if you squint at it sideways. It wasn't uncommon for butter to be adulterated with chalk or mashed up potatoes just to stretch it further. You don't ask what's in it, you just spread it thin and chew slowly. Sometimes there's porridge, but not the creamy, raisin-speckled kind you might find at a charming countryside inn. This is more like a gray glue made from oats or barley, or whatever grain was cheapest, stirred with water and a sprinkle of salt, though even salt isn't a given. You eat it straight from the pot if the bowls haven't been washed yet, scraping the wooden spoon along the sides to get the thickest parts. It sticks to your ribs and dulls the hunger just enough to get you through to lunch, which might very well be nothing at all. The kitchen table, if you even have one, might already be surrounded by other bodies, siblings, parents, maybe a lodger if your family's taken one in to help cover the rent. Space is tight, elbows are always bumping, and conversation is minimal. It's too early for jokes, too cold for arguments, and everyone's already thinking about what needs to be done the minute they step out the door. As a historical side note, the Victorian breakfast varied wildly depending on your social class. The wealthy would devour elaborate spreads of eggs, meats, kippers, kedgeree, which was a weird colonial rice and fish mashup, toast with marmalade, and so much more. But for the working class, breakfast was cheap, filling, and incredibly repetitive. Tea and bread were the constants, sometimes with a slice of cheese, or maybe a leftover bit of boiled potato. Protein was a true luxury. You glance out the window while you eat, watching as the fog either thickens or thins, depending on its mood. Across the way, a woman is beating a rug out her window with a violent energy. A man stumbles past with a limp, carrying a bucket that's sloshing with something too dark to be water. A group of kids chase each other down the alley, laughing like they haven't yet realized that the world is broken. Your tea has gone cold, but you drink it anyway, waste not, want not. And here's your fringe fact for the day. Some people, especially in the poorer districts, started their mornings with gin. It wasn't an act of rebellion, but simply because the water wasn't always safe to drink, and gin was cheap, strong, and easy to get. Known as Mother's Ruin, gin was blamed for everything from criminal behavior to spontaneous fainting. Of course, it wasn't just the gin, it was also the poverty, malnutrition, untreated illnesses, and sheer desperation. But gin made for a convenient scapegoat. Scholars still debate just how widespread alcohol abuse really was in the Victorian slums. Temperance activists painted a picture of entire neighborhoods drowning in booze, while others argue the drinking was more moderate than the propaganda claimed. What is clear, though, is that, for many people, a nip of gin or a steaming mug of beer soup, yes, that was a real thing, took the edge off of cold mornings and empty bellies. You finish the last bite of your toast, such as it is, and stack your dishes in the basin. They'll sit there until someone gets around to washing them, or until the pile collapses and forces the issue. There's no soap, just hot water and a cloth that smells faintly of mildew. You rinse your fingers, dry them on your shirt, and glance around the room for anything else you need to take with you. Your scarf, a scrap of twine you use as a belt, maybe the apple core from yesterday's lunch if you didn't finish it. You're not full, not even close, but the routine of it all matters. Eating something before you face the street again is a small win, a little bit of warmth in your gut, a few calories for walking, standing, or lifting, whatever the day decides to throw at you. Outside, the streets are coming alive now. Carts are rattling over the cobblestones, horses' breath steaming in the air, and shop shutters are creaking open. The bakers already started selling yesterday's bread at half price, and the fishmonger is trying to disguise the smell of day-old cod with a bucket of ice. You step outside and tighten your coat. Your stomach growls again, but there's no point in listening to it. Breakfast is over. Now it's time to earn your next one. You're 7 years old, and the idea of a childhood is mostly a theoretical concept. There are no cartoons, no playdates, no scented markers, and no birthday party clowns, unless you count the drunk man who juggles bricks outside the pub. Instead, you are expected to contribute to the family, and the sooner the better. The moment your hands can grasp something tighter than your mother's apron, they're considered ready for work. If you're a boy, you might be running down to the factory with your older brother, carrying a cold piece of bread in one hand and clutching your cap to your head with the other. If you're a girl, your day could start by filling a basket with matches, flowers, or little paper fans to sell on the street. It doesn't really matter what you sell, as long as someone gives you a coin for it, or at least doesn't chase you away with a broom. There's no school for you today, or any day, unless your family is exceptionally lucky or dangerously idealistic. Some children do go to school, especially after the 1870 Elementary Education Act was passed. But school costs money, and your family needs pennies more than they need you to learn poetry recitation. So you lace up your worn-out boots, or maybe just wrap your feet in rags if the boots have finally given up, and you head out. Factories are both terrifying and thrilling all at once. They rumble like giant beasts full of gears that bite and floors that shake constantly. The foreman is always yelling, and the other workers, older boys and women with hunched backs and blank eyes, rarely speak unless it's to snap at you. You're fast and you're small, and that's exactly what they want you for. You can fit under the machines, reach the jammed gears, and retrieve the cotton thread that slipped free, ducking between moving pistons while everything is still in motion. One mistake and that's it. A finger gone, a hand crushed, or maybe something worse. But the fear starts to fade by lunchtime. There's just no room for panic, only rhythm, in and out, duck and grab. The noise becomes a part of your heartbeat. The smoke becomes a part of your breath. You grow up very fast here. If you're lucky enough to avoid the factory, say, if you're not quite small enough anymore, or if work has been slow, maybe you're out selling instead. You join the other costers, which is a fun word that just means street sellers, and your job is to shout louder and faster than everyone else around you. You belt out lines like "flowers fresh" or "matches for a penny" in a voice that's already hoarse from last week. Sometimes you sell what your family made the night before: paper roses, ribbons, bookmarks, or dried lavender stuffed into little pouches. You learn tricks like following wealthier-looking women from the grocer to their carriage. Hopping your pitiful, sad stare earns you a coin, or pretending to cry if a policeman is nearby. Sometimes he'll toss you something just to get you to move along. It's not exactly honest work, but it's work, and that's about all that matters. Now here's a historical fact for you. By the mid-1800s, 1 in every 5 children in Britain was employed, not just doing chores but working. That includes chimney sweeps, match sellers, mill workers, pickpockets, mudlarks who were kids that scavenged in the river mud for scraps, and even little boys who sat under desks to warm their wealthy employers' feet. Yes, really, human footstools. Victorian Britain had a job for everyone, and while adults might have called it building character, for most kids, it was just about surviving. The work was dangerous, relentless, and usually involved long hours in cramped, filthy spaces. A 10-hour day wasn't unusual. Sometimes it was more, and weekends were a luxury, while breaks were practically mythical. There's a fringe case that sticks with historians even now, the so-called factory angel, Mary Carpenter, who opened schools for working children and campaigned for better conditions. Some saw her as a hero, others thought she was meddling. After all, pulling children from work meant pulling money from families who were already on the edge of starvation. It's one of those awkward truths of Victorian life. Saving the children wasn't always what the children needed or wanted. Debate still lingers over whether factory jobs, for all their horrors, gave children any kind of agency. Some scholars argue that these kids felt pride in contributing to their families, that the work gave them a sense of identity. Others point out the obvious, that it robbed them of their health, their education, and, well, their childhood. Back in your world, lunch is a vague idea. Maybe someone tosses you a crust of bread. Maybe you steal a bite from the milk cart when no one's looking. Or maybe your little sister meets you at the corner with a scrap of cheese wrapped in paper. Whatever it is, it's eaten fast on your feet between errands. You don't get to sit, you don't get to rest, you just keep moving. Your clothes grow dirtier with every passing hour. Your hands are blackened with soot or ink or foul or glue, depending on where you ended up working today. If it's raining, and it usually is, you're soaked through. You try to avoid the puddles, but they find you anyway, splashing up from under carts or sloshing into your cracked boots. Still, you just keep going. There's a strange sort of energy in the streets, something between desperation and determination. The older boys tease you, the younger ones mimic you. Someone sings off-key down the alley, and a man walks by playing a concertina. For a moment, the world feels almost whimsical, almost. The truth is, your body will probably give out before your spirit does. Maybe not today, maybe not for years, but the cough you picked up last winter never really went away, and your fingers are always cold, even when you're sleeping. You don't notice it anymore, that's just how things are. Your hands are tools here, your back is a lever, you just keep going. By late afternoon, your voice is gone, your legs ache, and your stomach feels like it's been scooped out, but you've got 2 pennies and a brass button someone dropped. You count them like they're treasure, and maybe, just maybe, you'll have enough for a hot roll on the way home, but maybe not. By the time the sun starts to slide somewhere behind the gray, it's hard to tell if the light is fading or if the fog is just winning again. You head for home, or rather, you just drift in that general direction, feet sore, fingers stiff, and stomach hollow. But just before you reach your building, something rank and pungent hits your nose. You know this smell all too well. It's always around, like an unwanted neighbor or that weird cousin who never leaves. You wrinkle your nose and glance down the alley. Ah, the night soil man. He's got a cart, a bucket, a bad attitude, and quite possibly the worst job in all of Victorian England, maybe in all of human history. His job is collecting human waste. That's it, buckets of it, shovels of it, scooping up what everyone else desperately wants to forget about. Because indoor plumbing is still an upper-class fantasy, and if you live in one of these back-to-back tenements, you go in a pot, a chamber pot to be precise. You keep it under the bed or in the corner, and you just hope no one knocks it over. Once it's full, and it doesn't take long, it has to go somewhere. You can't just keep adding to the slop like it's some kind of twisted sourdough starter. So, you, or more often your mother, empties it into the designated waste bin out back. And from there, the night soil man takes over. His cart is pulled by a tired-looking horse and is accompanied by a smell that no candle, soap, or divine intervention can ever truly erase. The man himself is used to the stench, but the rest of the street instinctively leans away as he passes. Children gag, adults grumble. You try not to breathe through your nose. The waste, your waste, is hauled away and dumped somewhere on the outskirts of the city. Sometimes it's sold to farmers as fertilizer, other times it just piles up, and no one really wants to talk about that part. Here's your historical tidbit. London didn't have a proper sewer system until the 1860s. Before that, the waste from millions of people went into cesspools, ditches, and eventually the Thames. It got so bad that in 1858, the stench from the river actually overwhelmed Parliament, and members literally fled the building with handkerchiefs pressed over their faces. The newspapers called it the Great Stink. This event actually led to political action because apparently nothing motivates Parliament quite like the smell of human despair. And if you're curious, yes, this system led to a lot of disease, cholera, typhoid, dysentery. Water sources were constantly contaminated. People were drinking water drawn from the same river they were dumping their filth into. It's like trying to cook soup in your own bathwater, and the results were exactly as horrifying as you would expect. Now, here's a particularly weird fact for you. Some night soil men were actually proud of their work. They considered themselves essential, and they weren't wrong. The job paid better than many other forms of manual labor, and while the social stigma was brutal, the income kept food on the table. Some even passed the job down through their families, forming generations of waste handlers. Just imagine the family dinners. There's still academic debate about how widespread night soil collection really was in practice. Some scholars argue that in the poorest districts, people didn't bother hauling their waste to central bins. They just dumped it out of windows or into alleys when no one was looking. Others suggest that the informal collection routes were actually quite organized, just invisible to the upper classes who pretended all filth politely disappeared on its own. Back in your world, you shuffle past the cart and try not to inhale too deeply. You've learned to identify the different smells: boiled onions, cold smoke, horse dung, and now, the unmistakable tang of human waste. It's oddly grounding in a bleak sort of way. This is the scent of survival. It tells you who has plumbing and who doesn't, who's home, who's sick, who's forgotten to clean their chamber pot again. As you turn the corner toward your tenement building, you see a stream of brownish water trickling along the gutter. You don't ask what's in it, you just step over it. At the door, a child you sort of know is poking a dead rat with a stick. He doesn't look up. You nod at him, he nods back. It's weirdly comforting. Inside, the stairs creak beneath your feet and the air smells better, less like excrement and more like boiled cabbage and old wood. You duck into your room where your mother is stirring something on the stove. It might be soup, or it might be hot water with a vegetable waved vaguely over it. Either way, it's warm. Your little brother is scrubbing the floor with a cloth that looks suspiciously like someone's old shirt. Your sister is folding a pile of laundry that never seems to get any smaller. You help your mother stir. She doesn't ask what you did today. She doesn't have to. It's the same as yesterday and the day before that, and it will be the same tomorrow. Dinner is thin and barely salty, but you eat it gratefully. Your mother saves a little bit for your father, who's still out working or drinking or both. You don't ask. Later, when you go to relieve yourself, you pull the curtain aside and lift the chamber pot. It's cold, unpleasant, but necessary. You do your business and slide the pot back into its hiding place next to the wall. You'll empty it tomorrow, maybe. You lie down on the mattress with your siblings, still wearing your day clothes because there's no real reason not to. You pull the thin blanket up to your chin and close your eyes. Outside, the night soil man rolls down the street again, his cart creaking, hooves clopping. The smell lingers in the air like a reminder that the city never really sleeps. It just stews. You drift off slowly, your nose full of smoke and sewage and soup, your body too tired to care. You wake up to the sound of coughing, not yours, not this time but your sister's, dry and relentless from the corner of the room. She pulls the threadbare blanket over her head and tries to quiet it, and you pretend not to notice. Coughing doesn't mean you get to rest or recover. It just means another day of pushing through it. You stretch your arms, already sore from yesterday, and hear the familiar pop of your shoulder. It's still dark out. It always is. Today, you're not headed to the factory or the flower cart, not yet. Today, you're headed somewhere different, somewhere that might possibly be worse, school. But that's only if your family can afford the penny fee, and if your shoes are in good enough shape to make the walk without cutting your feet. You check the sole of your left boot, still hanging on just barely. That'll have to do. School in Victorian England is a peculiar beast. If you're poor, it's optional, inconvenient, and occasionally humiliating. If you're middle class, it's a source of pride and pressure. For most kids like you, education is squeezed in between chores and work, and for many, it never comes at all. But the government has been pushing education harder lately, first with the 1870 Education Act, then with the 1880 Compulsory Education Act, and finally the Free Education Act of 1891. That means, in theory, every child should be going to school. In practice, though, if your parents need the income you bring home, they don't care what Parliament has to say. Still, you're going today, at least. The building is low and square, made of brick the color of old blood, and roofed with slate that leaks on rainy days. Inside, the air smells like chalk dust, damp coats, ink, and other children. The walls are lined with faded maps and moral posters that say things like clean hands, pure hearts, obedience is happiness, and other cheerful slogans that suggest you should be grateful just to sit upright and breathe. You shuffle over to your desk, a wooden contraption with a slanted top and a little groove for your slate pencil. Your feet dangle above the floor because the desk was clearly built for someone taller, probably a generation ago. There's a clump of hair stuck in the hinge. You try not to think about it. The teacher enters, always dressed in black, always frowning. If you're lucky, it's the nicer one, the one who lets you sit near the stove when your fingers start to turn blue. If not, it's the one who smells like bitterness and shoe polish, and who still uses the cane with a theatrical enthusiasm. You sit up a little straighter, just in case. Lessons begin with recitation, the alphabet, numbers, psalms, then copying lines onto your slates. I must be neat. I must not talk. God loves good children. You scratch out each word carefully, your tongue sticking out slightly, trying not to smudge the letters. The boy sitting beside you has ink on his nose and keeps sniffling. You do not ask questions. You do not look bored, because looking bored earns you a rap on the knuckles and a note sent home, and notes home are trouble. Here's your historical fact for the day. Victorian education for the poor was largely designed to produce obedient workers. The curriculum focused on the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic, plus a heavy dose of moral instruction. Critical thinking was not a priority, neither was creativity. The point was to make you useful to employers, quiet in church, and grateful for bread. And here's a strange fringe twist for you. Some of the earliest working-class schools were actually sponsored by factory owners. It wasn't out of kindness, but to keep the children too tired or too indoctrinated to protest their low wages. They believed a little bit of learning, carefully controlled, would make for better workers, but not too much learning. Education was like steam power, useful in moderation, but dangerous in the wrong hands. Of course, some scholars today argue that even this limited education offered a real opportunity. Literacy opened doors. Reading gave kids access to a world beyond the soot and the soup. And despite all the flaws in the system, there were some teachers who genuinely cared, who would slip books to their brightest students, who taught poetry even when it wasn't in the manual. But in your case, the book is falling apart, the cover is missing, and half the class has to share it, squinting over the same tattered page. You get to read a paragraph about rivers, then one about Roman centurions. You imagine what it might be like to wear armor instead of wool, to ride a horse instead of chasing one out of your yard. Midday, there's a short break, but no lunch is provided, not unless you count the thin gruel offered once a week if the church is feeling generous. Most children bring whatever they can: stale bread, a bruised apple, a lump of cold porridge. You unwrap your slice of bread and chew it slowly, watching the older boys play a rough game of football using a bundle of cloth as a ball. One of them falls hard and limps off. No one helps him, you don't either. He'll either walk it off or he won't. After lunch, it's back to copying, then catechism, which means memorizing religious answers to questions you barely understand. Finally, a song, something patriotic and tuneless. You mouth the words, hoping the teacher doesn't notice how little you care about Rule Britannia. Your legs ache from sitting still, and your back is sore from leaning over the desk. School ends with a chorus of scraping chair and shuffling boots. You file out, nodding politely at the teacher who doesn't even look up from her ledger. Outside, the light is already fading, your stomach is grumbling, and your hands are cold again. But you did learn a few new words today: tributary, discipline, obedience. Whether you'll remember them tomorrow is anyone's guess. Walking home, You pass other kids who didn't go to school today, mudlarks and chimney sweeps, flower sellers with their baskets already empty. One of them recognizes you and calls your name. You wave, but you don't stop. You're tired and there's still work to do, homework maybe, or helping your mother, or hauling water from the pump down the road. You're not sure if school will change your life. You're not even sure you'll go again tomorrow. But for today at least, you sat at a desk, you wrote words in chalk, you raised your hand once. And for a moment, when the teacher wasn't looking, you looked out the window and imagined what it might be like to live somewhere green, somewhere quiet, somewhere with plumbing. Saturday rolls in with the same gray sky and bitter chill as every other day of the week, but it feels different somehow. There's less urgency, more steam. You can actually hear it before your eyes even open. The wet slap of fabric, the splash of water in buckets, and the rhythmic thudding of laundry being pounded against stone. It's wash day, which in your household means a half day of utter chaos, one bruised knuckle, 2 burned fingers, and a whole lot of yelling over pots of boiling water. There's no modern washing machine humming quietly in the corner, no gentle detergent that smells like a mountain breeze, no dryer sheets, no spin cycle, and definitely no delicate setting for your clothes. In fact, the entire process feels like a punishment designed by someone who really, really hated fabric. You swing your legs out of bed and immediately step on a cold, wet sock, which means someone has already started without you. Wash day usually happens in one of 2 places, either in your own kitchen, if you're brave or poor enough to wrestle with it in-house, or more commonly, at the public wash house. Your family is going to the latter. It's cheaper than hiring a laundress and only mildly less humiliating than doing it in your own cramped space. You gather up armfuls of clothes, stiff with filth and damp with whatever was dripping from the ceiling last night, and stuff them into a burlap sack that leaks suspiciously. The wash house itself is a squat brick building that always smells of mildew, wet wool, and something faintly metallic. Inside, it's a completely different world. It's hot, really hot. The steam hits you like a solid wall, immediately fogging up your glasses if you had any to wear. Water drips constantly from the ceiling, and the windows are permanently fogged up, etched with the fingerprints of bored children and impatient husbands. You claim a wooden bench, 2 buckets, and 1 wash tub. There are no reservations, no privacy, and absolutely no mercy. Around you, the place is alive with the sounds of soaking, scrubbing, wringing, and of course, gossip. Women shout over the roar of copper pots bubbling on iron stoves, their sleeves rolled up, aprons soaked through, and their arms red from the heat. Children run between their legs, sliding on the wet stone floor, and somewhere, someone is singing a raspy hymn about better days or a bawdy tune that earns a few scolding glances. You help out by fetching water from the nearby communal pump, which spits and groans before finally surrendering a stream of icy liquid. You haul the heavy bucket back with both hands, nearly sloshing it all over your feet. Your mother gives you a nod of approval but doesn't stop her scrubbing. Her hands are raw, and her hair clings to her face. She's been at this since dawn. The first step is soaking. The clothes are dumped into wooden tubs filled with hot water and lye, either homemade or bought, depending on the week's luck. Then comes the scrubbing, which involves a washboard, relentless friction, and a lot of muttered curses under your breath. Shirts, Petticoats, socks, drawers, it all goes under the board and you scrub until your knuckles bleed. Then comes the wringing, which is even worse. The heavy iron wringer stands like some kind of medieval torture device, with 2 rollers and a crank. You have to feed the clothes through it, twisting the handle until the water squeals out and the machine fights back. If you get your fingers caught in it, you'll remember it for the rest of your life. After wringing, the clothes have to go out to dry. If it's not raining, and when is it not, you hang them in the communal yard, where lines crisscross like spiderwebs above your head. But on days like today, you have to settle for stringing them up indoors, across rafters, over chairs, and along the windows. The entire house becomes a forest of flapping, dripping fabric, and everything smells of soap, coal, and damp wool. Here's a bit of history for you. Victorian wash days were notorious for their intensity. They were often considered the hardest day of the week, especially for working-class women who did laundry for both their own families and for wealthier households. Some women made their entire income this way, hauling water, boiling linen, and scrubbing stains from silk petticoats they could never dream of wearing. It was exhausting, repetitive, and completely backbreaking, and it was almost always women's work. Now for a strange little fringe detail, some washhouses had rules about talking. No idle chatter, no gossip, no wasting time. Of course, these rules were rarely enforced, and in reality, the wash house often became the social hub of the neighborhood. Secrets were spilled along with the soap. Affairs were discovered through lipstick stains on collars, and feuds were born over who stole whose laundry peg. Some historians call it the steam room of the working class, part sanitation, part therapy session. There's still debate among scholars about the emotional toll of wash day. Was it a form of silent suffering, a thankless, endless loop of domestic servitude? Or was it, paradoxically, empowering, a day where women took control, worked in solidarity, and shared their burdens? The answer is probably both, misery and meaning soaked and spun together. Back in your world, the hours pass by slowly. Your hands are wrinkled from the water, and your shirt is clinging to your back. At one point, you drop a pair of drawers and have to chase them halfway across the floor, slipping on the suds and landing hard on your backside. No one helps you. They just laugh, and you laugh too, because otherwise you might cry. By mid-afternoon, the air in the wash house feels thick enough to slice. You've lost count of how many items you've scrubbed. Your arms feel like jelly and your face is flushed. But your basket is full of damp, clean clothes, and your mother finally calls it done for now. You carry the heavy basket home, your shoulders straining, the steam still clinging to your hair like a memory. Back at the tenement, you help hang everything up, and the room turns into a maze of trousers and chemises, with socks hanging like limp flags fluttering from the rafters. You'll sleep under them tonight, and if you're lucky, they'll be dry by morning. The house smells better now, fresher, like hard work, like soap and effort and something that's approaching dignity. You collapse onto the mattress, your muscles sore but satisfied. The worst day of the week is finally over, and you'll do it all again next Saturday because grime never quits, and neither do you. The factory whistle doesn't care if it's still dark out. It screeches like a wounded beast, splitting the air before dawn even dares to stretch across the sky. You wake to its call, not because you want to, but because not waking up means losing your shift. Losing your shift means losing a day's wages, and losing a day's wages means no bread. So you sit up, rub your eyes with grimy knuckles, and swing your feet to the floorboards that are already as cold as stone. Your hands are still sore from the wash house yesterday, the skin tight and cracked around your knuckles, but it's back to work today. If you're small and quick, maybe you're back at the mill dodging machinery that doesn't care about your size or your age. Or maybe you found a spot in the boot factory down on Water Street, where the air smells like glue, sweat, and wet leather, and your job is to nail soles to heels over and over again until your thumb goes completely numb. You arrive with dozens of others, all shuffling in through the same gates. The building looms like a prison, graystone, with narrow windows and black smoke belching from its rooftop stack. Inside, the machines are already humming, a monstrous chorus of gears, belts, and pistons. The air is thick with lint and dust, and you taste it every time you breathe. It settles in your throat, sticks to your skin, and makes your eyelashes feel heavy. You know your place here, literally. There's a mark on the floor where you're expected to stand, bend, lift, or sit all day, depending on your task. There's no wandering, no chatting, no resting. Time is money, and you are neither. You get to work immediately, picking up right where you left off yesterday. Maybe it's spooling thread, boxing nails, shaping candles, painting ceramic figurines, or packaging tea in paper satchels. Every movement is the same over and over again for hours on end, and blisters bloom fast, but you ignore them. The smell of burning oil and scorched fabric hangs low in the air. Somewhere down the line, someone shouts, a finger caught in the rollers, maybe. The foreman just yells louder and slaps a plank against a table, but the line doesn't stop. It never does. Pain is just background noise here. Let's bring in a hard historical fact here. During the Victorian era, workdays for laborers, especially factory workers, ran anywhere from 10 to 16 hours, 6 days a week. Children as young as 5 worked shoulder to shoulder with adults, and they weren't paid fairly if they were paid at all. Girls were usually paid even less than boys for doing the exact same work, and there were no safety laws, not until much, much later. Missing fingers, mangled hands, crushed limbs, these weren't rare accidents, they were expected losses. Your lunch break is a joke, 15 minutes if you're lucky, and you sit on a splintered bench eating with dirty hands. Maybe you've brought a cold potato or a piece of bread saved from breakfast. Someone nearby opens a paper parcel and the smell of pickled fish fills the air. You gag, but you eat your own bit anyway. Hunger always wins. Across the room, a girl no older than you is coughing again. She's been coughing for weeks now and her skin is gray. You don't ask because everyone here coughs. The dust, the fibers, the fumes, they eat into you slowly. You hear the word consumption whispered sometimes. It's what they say when the coughing gets worse and then someone just disappears. But here's a weird little fact most people don't think about. Some workers didn't hate the factory. Not at first, anyway. Compared to the uncertainty of street selling or begging, factory life was regular. You knew where you had to be, and you knew what you would earn. Some even found a strange comfort in the predictability. In the camaraderie between the workers, jokes were shared, meals were split, and friendships happened in the moments between the pain. Scholars still argue about this part. Was factory life purely exploitative? Or was it also a step forward? however miserable for the working poor. Some argue that it gave women new freedoms, as strange as that sounds, a chance to earn their own wages, even if it was just a pittance, a way to build something of a future for themselves. Others see it as the beginning of industrial servitude, replacing one form of poverty with another, just hidden behind brick walls and time cards. By the afternoon, the noise inside the factory has become something you no longer even hear. Your body moves automatically. Your fingers know the routine. You've stopped blinking at the soot, and your only concern now is the clock. How much longer until you're released from this place? But time moves slowly when your back aches and your stomach is empty. The machines never get tired. They never slow down. They don't care if you're cold or hungry or bleeding. They just demand more. When the whistle finally blows again, it's not a relief, it's just a pause. You've survived the day, that's all. You line up to leave, pass under the watchful eyes of the foreman who doesn't even know your name, and step out into the evening air that's somehow still full of smoke. Your hands are sore. Your shoulders are wrecked. You're 12 years old, or maybe 15, or maybe even younger. It's hard to say anymore, but your body feels older than your father's. You take your wages, if you're lucky, a few coins, and you tuck them into your boot where no one can snatch them. You don't talk much on the walk home. No one does. Everyone is just exhausted, hunched over like empty sacks. The younger kids kick pebbles. The older ones light matches or lean against walls to rest before their next chore. At home, your mother asks if it was a good day and you just shrug. No missing fingers, no burns, no extra hours, so that counts as a good day. Dinner is a thin stew. Maybe someone brought home a bone from the butcher's sweepings. You eat in silence, your hands trembling slightly with fatigue, and you stare into the fireless grate. The coals ran out yesterday, and the money is going to bread first. You fall asleep quickly tonight, curled up beside your siblings in your still damp shirt. Your dreams are strange, full of clanging metal and voices that echo like they've been trapped inside your skull. You dream of running machines, of smoke, of hands that no longer work, and then the whistle screams again. There's a point each day when your body just stops protesting, not because the pain is gone, but because it's become part of the background noise, like the clatter of carts in the street or the shouts of market sellers echoing off the walls. Today, as the fog begins to thin ever so slightly, and the chimneys cough their first black plumes into the sky, you find yourself shuffling down the street again. Though this time you're dreaming not of rest, but of a cup of tea, not a full meal, not a thick stew or roasted anything. No, you've set your sights low. You want tea, just a small cup, hot, sweet, and strong enough to revive your soul, or at least keep your eyelids from welding shut. Because for all its miserable drudgery, Victorian life clings fiercely to tea like it's the last luxury left in the world, and in some ways it is. You duck into the corner shop, a cramped little place that smells like dried herbs, spoiled vinegar, damp paper, and mice. The bell above the door jangles half-heartedly, and the shelves sag with tins of loose-leaf tea, wrapped sugar cubes, dusty bottles of something called tonic, and the occasional jar of something pickled that doesn't look safe to eat. The shopkeeper eyes you from behind the counter, his eyebrows raised, his fingers smudged with tobacco. He doesn't say a word, but you know the rules. Pay or get out. You fish a penny from your coat pocket, still damp and warm from being pressed against your hip, and you hand it over. In exchange, you get a scoop of loose tea leaves wrapped in paper, and if you're lucky, a sugar lump that's more gray than white but still passes as sweet. Back home, the kettle sits cold on the grate, but someone has already stuffed a few twigs and coals in the stove, trying to coax it to life. Eventually, the kettle sings, not like a bird but more like a teapot with bronchitis. Still, it's music to your ears. You pour the water over the leaves into a chipped mug that's been in your family since your grandfather's grandfather, stained brown from years of use and lacking a handle since last spring. The first sip burns your tongue, but it's worth it. The bitterness hits you first, sharp and earthy. Then the warmth spreads down your chest like a hug from the inside out. If you've managed to get some sugar in there, the sweetness cuts through just enough to give your brain a little jolt. You feel more awake already, a bit more human. Here's your historical bit. By the mid-1800s, tea had fully entrenched itself in British life, not just for the middle and upper classes, but for the working poor as well. It was cheap, thanks to colonial imports, and caffeinated, which helped people survive long days on very little food. Tea wasn't just a drink, it was fuel, a morning ritual, a midday pick-me-up, and a comfort when nothing else could be afforded. Workers brought flasks of it to the factory, and mothers poured it into cracked mugs for breakfast. It was boiled black and bitter, often reused 3 or 4 times, and the phrase, "a nice cup of tea," became a form of emotional first aid. But here's the kicker. Sugar, the entire Victorian tea obsession, came laced with the darker truth of the empire. Sugar, like tea, came from abroad, often grown and harvested by enslaved people or those only barely free in British colonies. Every sweet sip carried the weight of that exploitation, and the working class, often unknowingly, became daily participants in a global economy built on brutal foundations. And now, something delightfully weird, there were people who believed tea had moral consequences. Doctors and clergymen alike issued dire warnings about tea poisoning, claiming that too much tea would make women hysterical and children lazy. Some even claimed that tea, especially when consumed with sugar, led directly to crime. There were pamphlets, public debates, a lot of very serious men having very serious concerns about very ordinary drinks. Of course, modern historians now argue over whether tea helped or hurt the working class. Was it a pacifier, keeping people docile and content with their grim conditions? Or was it a small but real source of dignity, a way to hold on to their humanity in a world that barely acknowledged their existence? It probably depended on the day and how strong the tea was. Back in your little flat, the kitchen fills with the smell of overbrewed leaves. Your mother pours a cup for herself, sighing into the steam, and takes a long sip before even speaking. Your siblings are already huddled around the table, dunking crusts of bread into their cups to soften them. This is breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner, depending on how the week has gone. You remember when you were small, before you understood how money worked. You thought tea just appeared like rain or fog, that there was a never-ending supply. Now you know better. You've watched your mother haggle over the price of a quarter pound at the shop. You've seen her stretch a bag of sugar for a full week, measuring each spoonful as if it were gold dust. You've caught her rinsing out the used tea leaves to make a second brew, bitter and weak, but still warm. The kettle clinks back onto the grate. You wrap your hands around your cup, careful not to burn your fingertips again, and you take another sip, closing your eyes. For a few minutes, the world doesn't feel like it's pressing down on you. The cold is still there, but distant. The hunger is still there, but more polite. You sit quietly, listening to the small sounds of your family at tea. Slurps, sighs, the scraping of mugs. No one talks much. They're all just soaking in the warmth, not just of the liquid, but of the moment. This is one of the few rituals you have left that isn't entirely about survival. It's about pausing, breathing, sitting in something that resembles peace. Outside, the fog is lifting slightly. The chimneys still spit smoke, and the carts still rattle by. But for now, inside this little room, there's stillness. You finish your tea and place the mug down gently, almost reverently. Then it's time to move again. The stillness never lasts long, but it was yours for a little while. And in this world, that's something. The first thing you hear is the shouting. It rises above the normal street noise like a flock of angry birds, all squawking over each other, each voice louder than the last. You push open the tenement door and step out into the narrow, mud-slick lane just as someone hollers, "Hot pies for a penny," from across the street. A second later, another voice chimes in, "Lavender, fresh lavender." Then, without a pause, "Eels alive, eels alive-o." You're surrounded before you've even taken 5 steps. The street is full of motion. Faces, hands, baskets, carts, umbrellas, and always voices. Victorian street sellers don't have shops. They are the shop. They carry their entire business on their backs in crates or slung from shoulder poles, calling out what they've got in sing-song chants that could wake the dead. Some of them do wake the dead, judging by the groans of your neighbor who is trying to sleep off a late shift. You weave between the vendors like a fish in a crowded stream. There's the woman with a wooden tray of bootlaces and pins, her cry so rehearsed it sounds like a song. A boy, probably younger than you, pushes a wheelbarrow full of roasted chestnuts that smell sweet and smoky in the morning fog. Then a man with greasy hands shows off a pile of jellied eels, wriggling faintly in their gelatinous bath, daring someone to make eye contact. You spot a flower girl near the corner, the same one as always, with her curls tucked under a shawl and her fingers raw from the cold. "Posies, miss," she offers. Even though you're no miss and she knows it, you just shake your head, "Not today." She smiles anyway, salesmanship matters. One man walks the length of the street dragging a box behind him full of used books, announcing his wares like a prophet. Words for your mind, escape for your soul. You don't have a penny for that kind of escape, but you'd trade a week's worth of crusts for one good story. You watch his cart roll away, the wheels squeaking over the cobblestones. Here's your historical bit. By the late 19th century, London had tens of thousands of street sellers, each one carving out a patch of pavement and a livelihood in a city that didn't really care whether they lived or died. These weren't people selling out of whimsy or as a hobby. These were survivors. Every cry, every call, every pitch had been sharpened by desperation and repetition. The cries themselves became so familiar that they were printed in books, mimicked in plays, and remembered as part of the city's heartbeat. You hear them again now. Ripe apples, bruised but sweet. Muffins, crumpets hot. Matches, a bundle for a farthing. The sounds overlap, echoing off the walls, creating a rhythm that's as much a part of your life as the sound of your own footsteps. You could walk blindfolded through this market and know exactly who was selling what by their tone alone. And here's something weird and delightful. Some sellers were known citywide not for their wares, but for their cries. They became minor celebrities. Their chants were written into music hall routines or printed on postcards. One woman sold watercress for decades, always shouting the same phrase. Penny a bunch, fresh and green, and tourists came just to hear her. Others developed personal brands before branding was even a thing, wearing flashy hats, painting their carts bright colors, or throwing in a wink and a joke with each sale. It was Victorian marketing, street style. Modern historians still argue whether these cries were an act of resistance or just a routine. Some see them as powerful expressions of identity, each cry a declaration that I exist, I matter, I have something to offer. Others argue they were simply practical, a necessary tactic in a crowded economy where volume was king and silence meant starvation. Maybe both are true, probably like everything else here. It depends on the day. Back in your world, the noise is hypnotic. You find yourself trailing a vendor selling roasted potatoes, drawn more by the scent than anything else. He's got them wrapped in newspaper, steaming and scorched, and for a half penny, you could hold one in your hands and pretend it's dinner. You don't buy one, your last coin went to the tea, but you follow the smell for a while anyway, just to warm your hands near his brazier. The streets pulse with color and movement, women with baskets on their hips, children running between the stalls, men in long coats bickering over the price of bread. One man shouts about clocks, another tries to sell pills for female complaints, whatever those are. A woman sings a lullaby while holding up a tray of sugar mice. Hopping her voice is sweet enough to draw attention. You pass a blind man playing a fiddle, his case open before him. A dog sits beside him wearing a sign that reads, "Help the poor and blind." You drop a button into his case. It's not money, but it shines in the light, and sometimes that's enough. A cart rolls by, loaded with used clothing, shirts, trousers, good on you. The man cries, even though good is pushing it. You recognize a coat in the pile. Your friend Jack wore it last winter before his family moved, or maybe just disappeared. No one really talks about that. By late morning, the cries start to thin out, voices go hoarse, and stock runs low. Some vendors head home. Others shift to new corners, chasing the foot traffic. The street never really empties, though there's always someone selling, someone shouting, someone hopping to make just enough for a crust and a place by the fire. You head back, your ears ringing slightly from the din. You're carrying nothing, no purchases, no treasures, but you feel full in a strange way, full of voices, full of life, full of the knowledge that even here, even in the filth and the fog, people keep showing up, keep shouting into the cold air, keep making something out of nothing, and tomorrow they'll do it all again. The houses lean in so close you sometimes wonder if they're conspiring against you. You step into the narrow gap between the buildings, the kind of passageway that doesn't show up on maps because no one really wants to admit it exists. It's barely wide enough to walk without your shoulders brushing against the damp brick on either side, and the smell, damp plaster, boiled turnips, and something worse, clings to the air like a wet rag. This is home, or at least the outside edge of it. Your tenement building, like all the others, wasn't built to be kind. It was slapped together quickly, brick on brick, floor on floor, until it resembled housing only in the most technical sense. From the outside, it looks almost respectable if the fog is thick enough, but the moment you step inside, the illusion fades. The front door sticks and groans when you shove it open, and the hallway beyond is dim, even in the daylight, lit only by a single gas lamp sputtering near the ceiling, the flame barely clinging to life. The wallpaper, what's left of it, is a faded green pattern that's now curling off the walls like dying leaves. Children's chalk drawings stretch across the lower half of the corridor, and above them are water stains that look like clouds gathering to storm. You pass your neighbor's door, which is slightly ajar. Inside, a woman is peeling potatoes while a baby cries in a bassinet made from an old apple crate. She just nods when she sees you, doesn't smile, just nods. You nod back. No one expects pleasantries here, just the acknowledgement that you've both survived another day. Your room is on the 3rd floor, and the stairs creak dangerously under your feet. You know exactly which ones to skip to avoid falling through. A rat darts across the landing, but you don't even flinch. If it's small and moves fast, it's not your problem. It's the slow, bold ones you need to worry about. Inside your room, the air is marginally warmer, but only because someone's managed to light a fire using old chair legs and scrap paper. It still smokes more than it burns, but you can feel the heat if you sit close enough. The room is crowded, with one mattress on the floor, a chipped table, 4 chairs that don't match, and a cupboard that smells faintly of mold and secrets. You share this space with your entire family, maybe 5 people, maybe more, depending on who's in work and who isn't. Privacy is a myth, and you've long since stopped caring who sees you in your underclothes or hears you crying in your sleep. Everyone hears everything. The walls are so thin, you've had full conversations with your neighbor without either of you ever opening your doors. Here's your historical fact for the day. By the mid-1800s, London's population had exploded, cramming millions of people into spaces meant for thousands. Tenement housing became the norm for the working class, and whole families lived in single rooms, often with lodgers crammed in for extra income. Sanitation was an afterthought. Plaster cracked, pipes leaked, and windows either didn't open or didn't close. Life indoors wasn't much cleaner than the street outside. The soundscape of home is constant. A baby wailing somewhere below, a couple arguing next door, their voices muffled but clearly escalating. Someone stomps across the ceiling above, then silence, then another baby cries, then a door slams. You can follow your neighbors' entire daily routines without ever seeing their faces. And here's something odd. Some Victorian landlords actually considered these slums to be improvements over older housing. These model dwellings were supposed to be modern, efficient, a step forward for the poor. They included shared courtyards, indoor pump water, and even toilets, sometimes 1 per floor if you were very lucky. But improvement is a relative term when the toilet is always broken, the water tastes like iron, and the stairwell smells like it's fermenting. There's still debate about how bad it truly was. Some scholars argue that tenement life was unbearable, dehumanizing, filthy, and physically dangerous. Others suggest that the communities that formed within these spaces offered a kind of social resilience, that despite everything, people found ways to live with dignity. It's probably both, misery and solidarity rubbing elbows in the same damp room. You go to the window, such as it is. The glass is fogged with condensation, scratched, and covered with a cloth in the winter to keep out the cold, but you peel it back for a second. Across the alley, you can see straight into someone else's life. A man shaving in the reflection of a soot-covered pot lid. A woman hanging laundry on a string tied to the window latch. A kid picking his nose with a focus so intense it borders on artistic. The houses are so close together you can hear someone brushing their teeth 2 floors down. You can hear someone wheezing in their sleep. You can hear the clink of a spoon against a bowl. The unmistakable sound of someone trying to scrape a meal from very little. Dinner in your room tonight is a thin stew again, always stew, always a little more watery than you'd like. You all gather around the table, some on chairs, some on the floor, and you pass the bread around. There's never enough, but you get a piece, soak it in the broth, and chew slowly. You don't talk much. Everyone is too tired, the fire spits, and a piece of wood collapses into ash. Later, the mattress is rolled out and blankets are shared, feet get tangled, elbows poke, someone snores, someone coughs, and a baby cries again. You stare up at the ceiling, counting the cracks, tracing the mold patches like they're constellations. The room smells of people, not unwashed exactly, just lived in. Cold smoke, boiled onions, damp wool, and something else, something human. You're used to it, it's the smell of your life. Outside, the tenement walls hold you in, so close you can feel the house breathing. You're not alone, not ever, not in these streets, not in this room, and somehow that's both a comfort and a curse. It's hard to say when bathing became a luxury, not in the grand, perfumed, candlelit sense, but just in the bare minimum, water on skin, scrape the grime off sense. You wake up feeling crusted over with sweat, soot, and a week's worth of factory air. And still, you hesitate because getting clean isn't easy, it's an event, it's an ordeal. And in most Victorian homes, especially yours, it's not something you do daily or even weekly, it's something you schedule around water, weather, firewood, and sheer willpower. You sit up on the mattress and scratch your neck. The itch is always worst in the morning when the sweat of sleep dries under the layers of grime. Your mother announces it without ceremony. We'll do a wash tonight. That means you'll need to fetch water, heat it, scrub with lye soap, and fight over who gets the first bucket. It also means you'll be cold, damp, and possibly embarrassed. There's no bathroom in your tenement, not even close. What you have is a battered tin tub stored upright in the corner behind a curtain, and a strong family tradition of pretending this arrangement is perfectly normal. When it's time, the tub is dragged out and placed in the middle of the kitchen floor. Water is heated on the stove, kettle by kettle, and poured in with exaggerated care, like it's liquid gold, which honestly it sort of is. You help haul the water, trudging back and forth to the communal pump outside. The pump is rusted and stiff, and the water that gurgles out is frigid and iron-tinted. Your fingers sting just from touching the bucket's metal handle. By the time you get back, your sleeves are soaked, your arms ache, and your shoes squelch. Was it worth it? The jury's still out. The first to bathe is usually the youngest or the cleanest. That's how it works here. Everyone else gets to share the same water, just topped off with a little more hot water from the stove as it cools. By the time it's your turn, the water has gone cloudy, greasy, and vaguely gray, but you step in anyway. No one is fussy around here. You lower yourself into the tin tub like an old man easing himself into a grave. The water is both too hot and not hot enough. Your knees poke up above the surface like little islands. You reach for the soap, a yellow brick that smells strongly of ash and despair, and you start scrubbing hard. You work at the grime like it owes you money. Behind the ears, under the nails, between the toes, it takes effort, it takes time, and all the while someone is waiting for their turn, tapping their foot and sighing loudly. Here's your historical fact: in working-class Victorian homes, full baths were rare. Most people bathed in shared tubs or at public bathhouses when they could afford it. Soap was harsh and often homemade, consisting of animal fat and lye. Personal hygiene wasn't about freshness or vanity. It was about staving off lice, fleas, and the slow crawl of skin disease. And even then, there wasn't always time or fuel to make it happen. You cleaned what you could when you could. Fringe fact: some Victorians genuinely believed that too much bathing could be dangerous. There were pamphlets warning that excessive washing might weaken the nerves or expose the body to illness. Cleanliness was encouraged, sort of, but only in moderation. Cold water, especially, was seen by some as bracing, purifying, and character-building, while others just saw it as a good way to ruin your weekend. Even among the educated, hygiene habits were wildly inconsistent. Queen Victoria herself bathed infrequently and was known to dislike the smell of perfume, and many scholars now argue that the clean Victorian ideal is something we've imposed retroactively, scrubbing their history harder than they ever scrubbed their own backs. You pour a tin cup of water over your head and it stings as it runs down your spine, cold enough to make your teeth ache. Still, there's something satisfying about the sensation, the way the dirt lifts from your skin, the way the steam curls around your face. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine a proper bath, one with soap that doesn't burn your hands, with scented oils, with privacy. But that dream ends quickly as someone knocks on the door. "You done yet?" You sigh, scrub your scalp one last time, and then you step out. The floor is wet, and your feet are colder than ever. You dry off with a towel that smells like damp cupboards and maybe last week's stew. You pull on your shirt, which is technically clean but still feels vaguely crusty, and you make room for the next person. The water is dumped outside, down the drain or into the alley, and you watch it swirl away with bits of lint and hair floating on the top, disappearing into a world that still doesn't know what to do with its waste. Bath night leaves the whole room heavy with moisture. The windows fog up, the stove pops, and the clothes strung across the ceiling drip onto your shoulders if you're not careful. Your hair sticks to your scalp, and your skin feels tight, but you're clean for now, and that's not nothing. You climb into bed, still damp, still shivering. The mattress is no drier than you are, but it's warm from shared body heat. Your brother rolls over and mumbles in his sleep. Your sister coughs once, then settles. Outside, you hear the distant bell of the bathhouse closing for the night. Some families have money for that, but not yours. You get the tub, the kettle, the cold feet, and the quick scrubbing, but still, you're clean enough to face tomorrow. The fog isn't just outside anymore. It's everywhere, in your lungs, in your coat, in your thoughts. It rolls down the street in thick, ghostly waves, swallowing whole buildings and swallowing you along with them. It coats every brick, every horse cart, every gas lamp with a yellowish smear, like someone tried to paint the world in nicotine and candle grease. You step out into it anyway, you have to. Fog or no fog, the day keeps moving, and so do you. This isn't just any fog, this is the real stuff, the infamous, choking, sulfur-laced London pea souper. A proper smog that makes your eyes sting and your throat feel like you've swallowed a handful of ashes. It's not romantic. It's not mysterious. It's not the kind that makes poets sigh wistfully while leaning out of their garret windows. This fog is industrial, mean, and heavy with coal smoke and factory fumes. You can taste it when you breathe, and it sits in your chest like a wet dog. You walk slowly, one hand out to feel your way along the wall. You can't see the end of the street, in fact, you can't even see across it. Shapes move through the mist like shadows, mostly people, some horses, one particularly confused goat. A man bumps into you, mutters something, and disappears again before you can tell whether it was a curse or a compliment. It's like being underwater but louder and grittier. Your boots make soft, wet sounds on the cobblestones, and somewhere nearby, a cart crashes into a lamppost. The horse whinnies, the driver shouts. You hear glass break, but no one screams, though no one even rushes to help. This happens too often to be exciting. Here's your historical fact: the Great London Smog wasn't just one terrible event, it was a recurring part of life. Fog like this settled over the city dozens of times throughout the 19th century, caused by a deadly mix of coal-burning stoves, industrial smoke, and stagnant weather. People called it a London particular, like it was some charming regional delicacy, but it wasn't charming, it was lethal. During the Great Fog of 1873, over 700 people died in just a few days, and that wasn't even the worst one. This fog doesn't just kill quickly, it kills slowly too. It worms its way into lungs that are already weakened by cold, hunger, and damp housing. It stirs up old coughs, triggers asthma attacks, and accelerates the slow slide into consumption. You can feel it now, burning at the edges of your breathing, a low scratch that won't clear, a weight pressing behind your ribs, but there's nothing you can do about it, you just keep walking. You pass a newsboy selling papers from behind a cloth he's tied over his face. He's cut holes for his eyes. The headlines flap in the foggy wind. More factories shut down by smog. Train delays expected. Doctors warn, stay indoors. As if anyone has that luxury, as if the city waits for clear skies. You reach the bakery, or what you think is the bakery, based on the faint smell of burnt crust and yesterday's yeast. Inside, the windows are steamed up so badly the whole shop looks like it's in hiding. The baker's wife hands you a loaf with her sleeve held over her mouth. She doesn't speak. No one does, not much. Breathing is hard enough. And now for a strange little fringe fact. During particularly thick fogs, people started wearing improvised masks, scarves, rags soaked in vinegar, even sponges tied to their faces. They called them anti-fog respirators, and while they didn't work very well, they at least gave the illusion of doing something. Wealthier folks had carriages with glass covers. The poor had hope and handkerchiefs. Some historians argue the fog shaped the very character of the Victorian city, that it changed how people moved, how they worked, how they saw the world. There are claims that crime spiked during foggy days, with thieves using the low visibility to slip in and out of homes unnoticed. Others say that's exaggerated, that most crimes still happened in plain view, fog or not. What is certain is that the fog became part of the city's personality, murky, mysterious, and chokingly alive. You take the long way home because the short way has disappeared. The fog has swallowed entire alleys, turned buildings into silhouettes and people into whispers. You pass a lamplighter, struggling to ignite his torch, the flame instantly dimmed by the thick air. He curses softly and moves on to the next one. Back at your building, the fog has crept inside. It seeps under the doors and through the cracked window panes. You find your way up the stairs by touch, counting each step, your fingers brushing against the cold, damp wall. The stairwell smells like wet wool and coal smoke, same as usual, just heavier. Inside, the room is full of a haze, the fire crackles, but the smoke doesn't rise. It just pools around the ceiling, adding to the blur. Your mother wraps a scarf around her mouth and gestures for you to sit down. The bread you brought is shared silently. The taste is dull today, maybe from the fog, maybe from the same ingredients you've eaten for months, but you chew anyway. Later, you sit by the window and watch nothing because there's nothing to see. The world has vanished into a thick yellow smear. You can barely make out the flicker of the gas lamp outside, burning like a forgotten star in a sky that never ends. You go to bed with the taste of soot still in your mouth, your lungs tight, your breath shallow. You dream of blue skies, of fields with clean air and wind that doesn't sting, and then you wake up and it's still there, the fog waiting for you. Sunday mornings begin with an entirely different kind of pressure. The pressure to look clean, sound pious, and pretend, just for an hour or two, that your life isn't entirely falling apart. It's church day, and you'd almost prefer the factory almost. You wake to your mother already bustling around the room with a half-damp shirt in her hands, waving it near the fire to finish drying it. She's muttering under her breath about scuffed boots and torn stockings, while your younger sister sobs quietly because her only dress still has yesterday's porridge on it. The place smells like starch, smoke, and anxiety. You sit up and start the slow process of transforming yourself into someone respectable. Church clothing is an extra. It's repurposed. It's the same garments you always wear, just scrubbed harder, stitched roughly, and rearranged to look a bit less like you just spent the week sleeping on a damp floor. Your shirt is stiffer than usual, ironed with a flat stone that's been heated over the stove. Your boots have been wiped down with vinegar to make them shine, although the left one still leaks in the heel. Your mother is working on your brother's hair with a wet comb and a hard grip. He winces, but you pretend not to notice. Everyone is equally miserable. Looking presentable is a full-time job, and you're already behind schedule. Outside, the street is transformed. The usual shouts of costermongers and the clattering of carts are quieter today, replaced by the measured click of heels on the cobblestones and the occasional hymn being hummed under someone's breath. Neighbors you haven't seen all week emerge from their crowded homes, looking mysteriously polished, like they've all agreed to a one-day truce with poverty. The church bells start to ring as you join the silent procession of bodies headed toward the chapel. It's not far, just a few blocks, but you walk carefully, trying not to splash mud on your skirt or trip over your own shoelaces. You pass other families doing the same, heads down, collars straight, children tucked tightly under their arms. There's no joy in it, just a sense of duty. Here's your historical fact. Victorian Sundays were steeped in social expectation, especially for the working class. Church attendance wasn't just about faith, it was about respectability. If you showed up in clean clothes, quiet and composed, you were seen as decent. If you didn't, you were judged harshly. Landlords noticed, employers noticed, everyone noticed. Missing church could brand you as lazy, immoral, or worse, ungrateful. The church itself looms large, both literally and symbolically. Inside, it's colder than it is outside, and the wooden pews are so hard, they might as well have been designed for punishment. You slide into your family's usual row, second from the back, behind the woman who smells like lavender water and disappointment. You try to sit still, your knees knock together. Your brother fidgets and your mother hisses at him through her teeth without moving her lips. The service begins, hymns first, then readings, then the sermon, which is less about divine love and more about sin. A lot of sin, mostly yours. You're told that poverty is a test, that suffering builds character, and that hard work and obedience will be rewarded in heaven. Not here, definitely not now. The minister speaks with a practiced urgency, gesturing toward the stained glass windows as if the saints themselves are keeping score. You glance around. Most of the congregation is barely listening. A man 2 rows up is asleep with his mouth open. A child nearby is picking at a scab with quiet focus. Your own mother has that blank look on her face, the one she wears when she's somewhere else entirely, probably thinking about what to cook for dinner with nothing in the cupboard. And here's the quirky fringe fact. Some Victorian churches had assigned pews that were rented by families on a weekly or annual basis. Wealthier families sat closer to the front, with polished brass nameplates and cushions. The poor got the back benches, unmarked, unpadded, and often directly under the drafty eaves. If you couldn't afford a pew, you had to stand at the back or just didn't come at all. In some cases, charitable churches allowed for free seating, which caused endless drama when newcomers dared to sit in someone's usual spot. Historians still argue over the real impact of religion in working-class Victorian life. Some see it as a tool of social control, designed to pacify the poor with promises of the afterlife, while keeping them obedient here on earth. Others argue it provided genuine comfort, a sense of structure, a community to belong to, even if that belonging came with a side of judgment and a strong whiff of superiority. The service ends with another hymn, this one in a minor key, which fits the mood perfectly. You mumble through the verses, your voice hoarse from the factory air, and then you rise for the final blessing. The minister's voice drones on while your stomach growls in protest. You press a hand to it, pretending to pray harder. Back outside, the cold hits your face like a slap. The sun never really comes out on Sundays, just a gray light and a sharp wind that sneaks under your coat collar. The street fills again with voices, quieter now, but less tense than they were earlier. The performance is over and people are returning to themselves. Someone laughs, a child skips, you exhale. Back home, your mother puts the kettle on with a weary sigh. The fire is low, but the room smells faintly of bread someone has managed to toast over the flame. You take off your church clothes carefully, folding them with the kind of reverence that's usually reserved for sacred objects. Because they are sacred, these scraps of dignity you get to wear once a week. Dinner is thin again, bread, maybe tea, maybe something from a tin, but you eat it together, and for once there's no shouting. Sunday dinner, as humble as it is, feels like a pause, a breath between the grind of the 6 other days. Later, you sit by the fire and listen to your mother hum. Not a religious hymn, not anymore, but the melody is soft, familiar, and it doesn't ask anything from her. It's just sound, comforting in its own quiet way. You go to bed early, the weight of Sunday already fading into the anticipation of Monday, the factory noise, the wet socks, the smoke in your lungs. But for now you rest, clothes folded, bell is not quite empty, and just a bit of silence in the air. There's a moment every morning, brief and fragile, when you forget all the rules. Before the corset tightens, before the sir and ma'am settle on your tongue like automatic syllables, before the streets remind you exactly where you belong. You lie in bed listening to the creaks of the building, the rattle of a distant cart, your sister's breath beside you, and for just a second you're not a boy or a girl in Victorian England, you're just you. And then someone calls your name and the spell breaks. Today starts like any other, with layers of clothing that define your gender, your class, and your value all at once. If you're a girl, you pull your hair back into a tight plait or a bun, anything tidy, and you slip into your dress, which is too short, too patched, and still smells faintly of last week's soap. If you're a boy, it's trousers, shirt, braces, and a cap. No matter who you are, you're not just dressing yourself, you're becoming your place in society. The Victorian world is obsessed with rules, especially about gender. Everything you do is judged through the lens of proper behavior. The way you walk, sit, speak, laugh, work, clean, eat, it all matters, or rather, how you do it matters. And who is watching, because there's always someone watching. For women and girls, it's all about modesty, submission, and quiet usefulness. You're supposed to serve, smile, and never speak out of turn. You're expected to be grateful for every crumb of approval, and even your posture has a moral consequence. Sit up straight, don't slouch, don't fidget, fold your hands like you're waiting for Judgment Day. For men and boys, it's about strength, control, and hard work. You're not allowed to cry, you're not allowed to be idle. You're supposed to earn, protect, and keep everything bottled up inside. Sensitivity is a flaw and gentleness is suspect. Any deviation is questioned. You step outside and the rules follow you like a shadow. A woman walking alone is noticed. A man loitering too long is questioned. A girl speaking too loudly gets a glare. A boy who hesitates when he's told to lift something heavy gets called soft. Gender isn't just an identity here, it's an enforcement. Every stranger on the street becomes a silent judge, tallying up your behavior with invisible marks. Here's your historical anchor for today. Victorian society was deeply patriarchal. Laws, wages, inheritance, education, it all tilted heavily in favor of men. Married women had no legal identity apart from their husbands until the Married Women's Property Acts of 1870 and 1882. Before that, everything a woman owned, even her own earnings, became her husband's property. In the eyes of the law, she was basically absorbed. And that dynamic trickled all the way down. A poor woman had fewer rights than a rich one, but she also carried more burdens. She worked long hours in factories or laundries, then came home to raise the children and keep the house in order. Men might have dominated the world outside, but women were expected to control the domestic space quietly, efficiently, and without thanks. Even among the children, the gender lines are drawn early. Boys are sent to apprenticeships, while girls are sent to service. Boys learn trades, girls learn to sew. One might inherit a set of tools, the other a sewing kit. You might love to read, to draw, to dream, but unless your talents align with your assigned gender, no one really cares. And here's a strange little fringe fact. There were manuals, entire books written to teach children how to behave properly according to their gender. Boys' books emphasized courage, duty, and empire building, while girls' books focused on manners, piety, and being pleasing. One popular title for girls was The Daughters of England, their position in society, character, and responsibilities. And it reads like a gentle scolding stretched across 500 pages. Still, some historians argue that women, even under all these constraints, held a subtle kind of power. They managed the homes, steered the family decisions, and influenced community life. In poor families especially, the mothers often controlled the household budget, what little there was of it, and made the hard choices that kept everyone fed. Strength didn't always look like power, but there were cracks in the system. Women began to organize, to speak out, forming clubs and reading groups, pushing for suffrage, for access to education, for property rights. And men too, those who didn't fit the rigid mold, found ways to resist quietly. A gentle father, a boy who loved music instead of sports, a girl who refused to marry. The system didn't like them, but they existed anyway. Back on your own little street, you pass the tailor's apprentice, who's as thin as a wire and always polite. He gets teased for the way he speaks, too precise, too careful. A few boys shout after him, but he ignores them, his eyes fixed on the ground. A little further on, you see Miss Holloway, who owns the dress shop and lives with her cousin, a woman who has never been seen with a man. They're whispered about, always respectfully, but always with a trace of something more. You don't really know what you are, not yet. You just know you don't quite fit. Maybe you hate sewing but love cleaning. Maybe you like books more than brooms. Maybe you've never felt comfortable in the dress you're told to wear, or the boots, or the body. You keep walking quietly. The world isn't kind to difference. At home, your sister tries to speak her mind at dinner and is immediately shushed. Your brother talks right over her and gets praised for his confidence. Your mother just sighs. Your father doesn't even notice. But you notice. Later, you look at yourself in the broken mirror, you tilt your head, and you try to picture what your life would be like if you could choose. Different clothes, different rules, a different skin, but this is Victorian England. And here your gender isn't a question. It's an instruction manual with consequences. You exhale slowly, rub the smudge off your cheek, and prepare for tomorrow. The same shadow, the same rules, but maybe someday, not forever. You're holding a wicker basket with a broken handle and one frayed cloth draped over the top. And you've been on your feet for over an hour, and you've bought exactly 4 things: an onion, a chunk of bread, a scoop of dried peas, and a lump of something that might be cheese or might be plaster with aspirations. Grocery shopping in Victorian England isn't a cheerful stroll through brightly lit aisles with harp music playing overhead. It's a full-contact sport. It's bartering, sniffing, squinting, second-guessing, and walking home with your hands raw from the cold and your brain fried from trying to do arithmetic while dodging puddles and horse droppings. There's no one-stop shop, no Tesco, no Safeway, no trolley to lean on while you consider 6 different brands of yogurt. Shopping is done in rounds. Meat from the butcher, bread from the baker, produce from whoever's shouting the loudest today, and every single vendor wants your last half penny. You step into the street prepared for battle. The bakery is your first stop, and the smell is intoxicating. Yeast and ash and something just barely sweet. A boy with a soot-smudged face hands you yesterday's bread at a discount, and you pay with a coin so worn it's almost smooth. Next, you head to the produce stall, which is really just a man with a cart and a vague promise that these apples were fresh last week. You weigh one in your hand, it's soft, too soft. You hand it back and grab an onion instead. It still has dirt on it, which is a good sign. The butcher is further down the lane, already elbow deep in some animal you don't want to identify. You don't go in. You just hover by the doorway until he notices you. You ask for bones, just bones for broth, and he grunts, wraps 2 greasy ribs in paper, and waves you off like you're a stray cat. You clutch the bundle to your chest like it's treasure. Here's your historical fact. Shopping in Victorian England, especially for the working class, was a daily necessity, not a weekly event. Without refrigeration, you couldn't store food for very long. Bread went stale in 2 days. Meat had to be cooked quickly or cured within an inch of its life. Milk was delivered daily, and it was often watered down. Eggs were fresh if you were lucky, and foul if you weren't. You learned to eat seasonally because there was no other choice. Bananas and pineapples were foreign, mythical things, only seen in books or in the shops of the very rich. And speaking of milk, here's a slightly horrifying fringe fact. Milk was sometimes whitened with chalk or plaster dust to stretch it further. Bread could contain alum, and tea leaves were often reused and dried, then swept off the floor and resold. There were entire street economies built around food salvage, which was a polite word for what was basically second-hand groceries. You knew better than to ask questions. If it didn't smell like it was trying to kill you, you ate it. Still, some historians argue that the Victorian poor ate more vegetables than we assume, not out of health consciousness, but because meat was so expensive. Root vegetables, dried legumes, cabbage, and onions were staples. Potatoes were a lifeline. And if you had a small garden, or even just a few flower pots, you might grow your own herbs or leafy greens, stretching your stew into something that tasted like effort. You reach the end of the market street and you take stock. The basket is still mostly empty, but it'll have to do. You wrap the bread in a cloth to keep it dry, and the peas rattle in their pouch like the coins you wish you had. You glance back toward the sweet shop, just for a second. Its window is clouded with steam and streaked with fingerprints. Inside, licorice twists and barley sugars glitter like gems behind the glass, but you have no money left, so you walk away quickly before the wanting settles in too deep. On the way home, you pass the fishmonger. He nods. You nod back, but you don't buy anything. The smell is sharp enough to keep you at arm's length. A boy leans against a wall, eating something on a stick. Maybe it's meat, maybe it's not. You look away. The streets are slick with a thin film of slush and grime, and your boots slip a little with each step. You pass 2 girls selling ribbons and a man shouting about soap. A dog trots past with half a biscuit in its mouth and an air of absolute triumph. Back home, your mother takes the basket and just sighs. She knows how much you spent, and she knows how little it bought, but she says, "Thank you, anyway." Then she starts chopping the onion. The bread is torn into chunks and tossed into a pot with the bones, some peas, and water. It simmers slowly, filling the room with the kind of scent that smells like hope, or at least like salt. You sit near the stove, warming your hands. Your sister asks if you got any sweets, and you just shake your head. She doesn't pout. She just nods and goes back to peeling a potato with her thumb, while your brother plays with a bit of twine, tying knots he learned from the boy who works down by the river. No one talks much. There's not much to say. Dinner is soup again, bread again, but it's warm and you made it happen. You went out. You bought what you could and you brought it home. That's survival, that's love, Victorian style. Later, you scrape the bowls clean and stack them near the basin. The candle burns low. You think of the sweet shop window again, the barley sugar twists catching the light, maybe next week if you're lucky. Your head is pounding. Your throat feels like sandpaper. And your chest is making a rattling noise that would be funny if it didn't hurt so much to laugh. You've been coughing since yesterday afternoon, the kind of deep, dragging cough that curls around your ribs and steals the breath from your lungs. Everyone else is trying not to notice, because in a Victorian household, sickness is less about concern and more about math. Can we afford for you to be ill? You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, though blanket is a generous word. It's more like a quilted suggestion. And you watch your mother root through the kitchen cupboard with the expression of someone who is already 2 steps past frustration. The cupboard doesn't have much in it. Some old jam jars, dried herbs in a paper packet, a jar of lard, and a small glass bottle with a label that has long since peeled off. She grabs the bottle. This, apparently, is medicine. You uncork it and sniff. It smells like the underside of a church pew and a bit like paint. You tip it back and swallow a mouthful before your brain can object, and it burns all the way down. Within seconds, your nose is running. Your ears are buzzing, and your stomach is rethinking things, so you lie back down and wait. Victorian medicine, especially for the poor, is a game of odds. Some of it works, some of it feels like it works, and some of it is just rebranded poison with a cheerful label, and you never quite know which one you're getting. Here's your historical fact. Many Victorian remedies were packed with ingredients that would make a modern pharmacist faint. Opium, morphine, laudanum, chloroform, mercury, cocaine, and even arsenic were all common. You could buy most of them over the counter, no questions asked, as long as you had a few pennies and a reasonably convincing cough. Laudanum, in particular, was the go-to for everything from toothaches to depression to female troubles. It was essentially just alcohol and opium in a bottle, miraculously effective and terrifyingly addictive. The bottle you just drank from was probably one of those over-the-counter miracle cures, cheap, sharp-tasting, and about 40% gin with a dash of something botanical to make it smell medicinal. You don't know if it'll cure anything, but you do feel a little floaty, and that's something. If you're lucky enough to see a doctor, and that's a big if, it will cost you. Even a quick home visit can drain a week's wages, so most working families avoid it unless the situation gets truly dire. And even then, there's no guarantee the doctor will do more than mutter some Latin, write something illegible, and recommend more rest. Rest in a house of 7 people, 1 bed and no heating. Still, if you were to go, say, to a free dispensary or a charity hospital, you'd probably be treated with something like mustard plasters, leeches, or a brisk bloodletting to balance your humors. Victorian medicine was caught between superstition, tradition, and genuine progress. Germ theory was still just taking hold, and not everyone believed in it yet. Some still thought disease came from miasma, bad air, rotting smells, or moral weakness, and you're pretty sure you have all three. Here's the weird fringe fact of the night. There was a brief moment when electricity was considered a cure-all. You could pay to be shocked with static currents to treat headaches, nervousness, or hysteria. There were electric belts, brushes, and even electric corsets. Did they work? No, but were people absolutely convinced they did? Yes, you could zap yourself into feeling slightly more alive, or at least distracted from your cough. And while historians debate how effective these remedies really were, there's a general agreement that most poor families treated illness the same way they treated everything else: together. You relied on knowledge passed down through generations, on herbal poultices, on prayers, and on neighborly advice that may or may not have been based on a complete misunderstanding of anatomy. You might see the midwife before the doctor, or the woman next door who knows about tonics, or the guy in the alley who's selling guaranteed cures out of a suitcase. Back at home, your mother is boiling something in a pot. You think it's a mix of thyme and onion skins, and it smells like wet grass and bitterness. She spoons it into a chipped bowl and brings it to you with a look that says, "Just eat it and don't complain." You do. It's hot and vaguely unpleasant, but it's oddly soothing, or maybe that's the laudanum talking. Your sister rubs your back in slow circles, and your brother offers you a piece of peppermint he's been saving. You accept it like it's sacred, and it helps slightly. You curl up and close your eyes. The room smells like steam, coal, and cough. Somewhere outside, someone is hawking something about elixirs, and the sound fades in and out as your head starts to swim. Even when you're sick, there's no rest here. The baby cries, the neighbors stomp, the fire sputters, but your body is too heavy to care. You drift in and out of sleep, coughing between your dreams, listening to the creak of the ceiling and the clink of spoons in the next room. Tomorrow, if you're better, you'll go back to work, and if you're not, you'll try again the next day. There are no sick days here, only sick hours, stolen when you can get them. Your mother will stretch the medicine, the herbs, the hope, and somehow, most of the time, you survive. The landlord hasn't been seen in 3 weeks, but that doesn't mean he's not around. His presence is like mildew, silent, creeping, and impossible to ignore. Your family owes 2 weeks' rent, so does the family above you. The woman downstairs swears she paid last Friday, but the man who collects the rent said otherwise, and now her door has a split in it from where he kicked it in to make a point. No one says much about it. This is just how things go. You wake up early, not because you want to, but because the rats are having some sort of dawn ceremony near the cupboard, knocking over spoons and chasing each other across the cold kitchen tiles. You sit up and rub your eyes. There's a bite on your ankle, not fresh, but not old either, and it itches in that mean, persistent way. You make a mental note to check the traps later if your brother hasn't already sold them for copper. Outside, the streets are already busy, not just with sellers and horses and deliveries, but with voices, sharp, nosy, relentless voices. Victorian working-class neighborhoods are a hive of constant commentary. Privacy is a myth. Every word you say is overheard, every pot you bang, every late return home, every cough, every knock, every argument. It's all part of the community's humming awareness. Not out of malice, just out of habit. Your neighbor, Mrs. Keatley, has appointed herself the local historian and moral police, and she's already shouting at the woman across the alley for leaving her washing out overnight. That's how mildew gets in the fabric, I'll have you know, she crows, wielding a wet pair of bloomers as though they're hard evidence of moral decay. The woman just glares but says nothing, and you slip past before either of them can drag you into the drama. You're running an errand today, fetching coal from the yard 3 streets over. It's not glamorous, but it's a few pence in your pocket, and that's more than most people can say. The coal yard is as grim as always. Black dust coats everything, your boots, your sleeves, the inside of your nose. You cough once, spit, and carry on. There's a boy working the shovel today who looks about 9, with arms like toothpicks and a permanent scowl. You nod, but he doesn't nod back. As you haul the small sack down the alley, a group of girls is gossiping near the pump, whispering about the widow who started renting out her back room to a gentleman. No less, or so they say. Maybe he's just quiet. Maybe he's a cousin, maybe he's someone's escape plan. You just keep walking. Here's your historical fact. Victorian tenement neighborhoods were tightly packed, both physically and socially. Families lived on top of each other, sometimes literally, sharing rooms, walls, outhouses, even beds. With no soundproofing, people learned to listen and to talk and to guess. Gossip was a form of survival. It told you who was safe, who was sick, who might lend you a shilling, and who would take it without asking. News traveled faster than the rats, and that's saying something. And speaking of rats, there are more of them now, a lot more. You spotted 2 on the stairs last night and another one skittering across the rafters above your mattress. Some of them have names, not officially, but when you see the same one 3 nights in a row, you start calling it something. You've dubbed the big one with the half-ear Sergeant. He seems to run the place. The landlord won't send pest control. He says it's your job to keep the place clean, that the rats are a result of laziness, not rotting floorboards and open drains. But no one's seen him in weeks, just his runner, a lanky man in a brown hat who knocks loudly once a week and demands the rent in a tone that makes your skin crawl. Your mother deals with him. She always stands up straight when she answers the door, like a soldier. She doesn't let him see her wince when he calls her duck with a sneer, and you all stay quiet until he leaves. Here's your fringe fact. Some Victorian landlords own dozens of properties but refuse to spend even a shilling on repairs. Leaky ceilings, broken windows, rotting staircases, these weren't exceptions. They were the rule. If something broke, you had to fix it yourself. And if you couldn't, you just adapted. There are documented cases of families building makeshift scaffolding inside their own flats just to stop the ceiling from collapsing. One family supposedly slept under an open umbrella for weeks to avoid the dripping from above. Scholars still debate whether these landlords were all heartless or simply overwhelmed by a growing urban sprawl they couldn't manage. Some of them had hundreds of tenants, while others lived comfortably miles away and never saw the decay firsthand. But for the people living in it, you didn't care about the excuse. You just cared that the floor groaned when you walked, that the fire didn't keep out the cold, that plaster dust fell into your soup when the wind picked up. You drop off the coal and head back home, passing the row of shops on the way. The butcher is arguing with a constable. A dog is sleeping on a sack of grain like he owns it. and a child is crying in a window above the fishmongers. You try not to look. Back in your room, your mother is arguing with someone quietly. The runner came by again and he left her a note. Rent due tomorrow or there will be consequences. Your mother just folds the note like it's nothing and puts it in the drawer where she keeps important things. Buttons, letters, scraps of recipes, and a ribbon from when your sister was born. Later that night, you're sitting by the fire, counting the blisters on your palm, when Sergeant the Rat scurries across the floor with the confidence of a man who knows he pays no rent. Your brother tries to throw a boot at him, but he misses, and the rat vanishes behind the cupboard. The walls are quiet for now, but you know someone is listening. Someone always is. You lie down to sleep, one eye on the ceiling, one ear on the stairs. Tomorrow the landlord might show up or he might not, but the rats definitely will. You're sitting on the edge of the bed, your toes barely touching the cold floorboards, trying to decide whether it's worth standing up today. Your legs ache, your back is sore, and your stomach has been growling since last night, and there's a draft working its way up your spine like a determined ghost. But outside the window you hear music, badly played, yes, but cheerful in a way that makes your heart twitch. It's a fiddle from just a few streets over and someone is clapping along. You smile without meaning to. It's a bank holiday, at least that's what the calendar says. It doesn't mean you're off work, or that your father is, or that anyone in your building gets a picnic and a breezy train ride to the coast. For most working-class families, a holiday is more of a theory than a reality. You still get up, you still have to hustle. But there's a strange kind of lightness to the day, if not in your body, then in your spirit. In some houses, the children are dressed a bit better. Their ribbons are tied neatly, or their boots are polished. Maybe their fathers saved up a shilling or two for a visit to the park or a ride on the tram. You pass a few of them as you head toward the square, families dressed in their Sunday best, even though it's a Monday. The mothers hold their children's hands tightly, and the fathers walk with their shoulders a little straighter than usual. There's a rare kind of pride in just being out together. You're not headed to the park, though. You've been roped into helping clean out the rear alley of the bakery where your uncle works. He promised you half a meat pie and the chance to lick the jam pot when no one's looking, a fair trade. The alley stinks of yeast, ash, and whatever has been fermenting in the broken barrel near the drain. You get to work sweeping, sorting, and hauling old crates into a stack by the back wall. Halfway through, your uncle hands you a scrap of warm bread from the oven's edge. You burn your fingers, but you eat it fast, the crumbs sticking to your lips. It's better than anything you've had all week. Here's your historical fact. Bank holidays were introduced in 1871 with the passing of the Bank Holidays Act. It gave official recognition to a handful of days where the banks, government offices, and many businesses would close. For the middle and upper classes, this meant leisure, travel, and tea on the lawn, but for the working class, well, it was complicated. Some employers honored the days off, while some didn't, and some workers took the time to rest, while others simply couldn't afford to. Time off meant money lost, and yet, even without fancy excursions or iced cakes, people found ways to make the day special. Local parks became gathering places, music halls held matinees, and street performers came out in full force. Jugglers, puppeteers, singers, and quick-fingered pickpockets, all jostling for attention. Children played with hoops and sticks or invented games with nothing but stones and their imagination. Sometimes you'd hear about whole families taking the train to the seaside, not you, of course, but you'd see them in the streets, clutching umbrellas and sandwiches wrapped in newspaper, headed to Brighton or Margate or Southend. That was the dream. Salt air, donkey rides, and waves crashing at your feet. They'd come back sunburned, grinning, and slightly smug, talking about deck chairs and boiled sweets. You'd listen politely. Then you'd return to your usual alleyway routine. But even in the city, there's something gentler about today. You finish sweeping, wipe your hands on your shirt, and you join your uncle in the shop. He's pouring hot jam into little jars, humming off-key. You sit on a crate and dip a spoon into the pot, pretending it's fine china. The jam is tart, sweet, and probably the only fruit you'll get this month, and you savor every single lick. Now for your quirky fringe fact: some Victorian reformers absolutely hated holidays for the poor. They feared that too much free time would lead to idleness, drunkenness, and moral decay. Others saw them as a chance to civilize the lower classes, encouraging them to enjoy wholesome activities like nature walks, patriotic parades, and supervised picnics. Because nothing says relaxation like being watched while you chew a cold meat sandwich on wet grass. But there were also those, mostly the workers themselves, who fought for more holidays, more time off, more recognition that rest wasn't a weakness, that leisure was a right, not just a privilege for the rich. The early trade unionists argued that everyone deserved a break, a real one, one that didn't come with guilt or a hole in your week's pay. Back in your little part of the world, the street is starting to buzz. Children are dragging sticks along the railings. A boy with a concertina is playing a tune that sounds almost like music if you squint your ears. Someone shouts about a puppet show starting in the square, and you decide to go, just for a few minutes. The puppets are crude, painted wood with chipped joints, but the story is loud and funny. Punch hits Judy with a stick, Judy hits him back, and a crocodile appears for no reason at all. The children laugh and scream, and clap their hands like it's the greatest thing they've ever seen, and maybe it is. You don't have a penny to give the puppeteer, but he doesn't seem to mind. He just winks as you clap and starts another scene. Behind you, someone is handing out boiled sweets and you somehow end up with one, a gift from someone's grandmother maybe. It tastes like strawberry and soot and it makes your teeth ache, but you love it. As the sky begins to dim, the show ends and the crowd thins out. You head home with a warm stomach, sticky hands, and jam still under your fingernails. It wasn't a holiday in the way the books describe. No parasols, no beach, no picnic basket with gleaming silver spoons, but it was something. You lie in bed that night, your arms behind your head, listening to the distant hum of a drunk man singing patriotic songs on the next street over, and you smile. Tomorrow it's back to work, but today you had sweetness, laughter, a puppet show, a day off in your own way. Evening settles in slow and smoky, like a blanket that's been wrung out in a chimney. The streetlights sputter to life one by one. Those tall, crooked gas lamps with flickering flames that throw more shadow than they do light. You hear the hiss of the lamplighter's torch before you even see him, a quiet silhouette in the fog, his ladder slung over his shoulder like a second spine. Somewhere nearby, the pubs are beginning to fill up, the air thick with the sound of boots on stone and voices loosening with every pint. You're not heading home just yet, not tonight, because for once, there's something else to do, a bit of entertainment, a slice of life that isn't just working or washing or figuring out how to stretch half a loaf of bread into 3 meals. The music hall is open, and if you're lucky, you might be able to catch the last act, even if you have to press your ear to the brick wall outside to hear it. Or maybe you'll just stop at the pub, not inside, of course. You're too young, or too broke, or too suspicious of the old man who always stares a little too long. But outside, where the songs drift through the doorway and the scent of spilled beer mingles with tobacco and rain, it's warm in a way that feels familiar. There's always someone singing badly and someone else clapping along just to drown them out. Entertainment in Victorian England is rarely refined for people like you. It's loud, messy, and usually smells like pickled onions and someone else's ale breath. But it's yours, and sometimes it's brilliant. You pass the corner where Mr. Pierce sets up his punch and Judy's show most nights. The puppets dangle from his cart, chipped and grinning, their tiny wooden fists ready to deliver another round of slapstick violence to the delight of every child and more than a few adults. Punch's high-pitched cackle rings out, followed by Judy's indignant shriek. There's a baby doll, a crocodile, a policeman, and at least one plot twist involving a string of sausages. You've seen the show 20 times, and it never makes any sense, but it never has to. Here's your historical fact. Victorian music halls and street entertainments were a cornerstone of working-class leisure. Long before cinema or television, these noisy, crowded venues offered songs, sketches, slapstick, and satire. They were raucous, bawdy, and wildly popular. And by the 1880s, music halls had become a full-blown industry, with performers becoming household names. Songs from these stages were sung in alleys and parlors alike, passed from city to village and back again. For a few pennies, or for free if you stood outside and pretended not to be listening, you could escape. The stories might have been silly, the jokes crude, the melodies half stolen from folk tunes, but they were real, they were relatable. A man singing about a drunk wife, a woman mocking the upper class with perfect impressions. There was a power in it, humor as a form of protest, laughter as medicine. And here's your fringe fact of the night. Queen Victoria herself was rumored to have enjoyed a Punch and Judy show in her youth. While the royal family mostly kept their entertainment within the palace walls, with opera, theater, and chamber music, it's said that Victoria, once upon a time, laughed at Punch smacking everyone with his stick. Historians still argue whether it's true, but either way, the idea that even a queen might chuckle at such chaos feels strangely comforting. As you keep walking, the street becomes a little brighter, with candles in the windows and pub signs swinging on creaky iron brackets. You hear a woman belting out a song about a sailor who got lost in Soho. Her voice is cracked but strong, and a man nearby bangs a spoon against a bottle in time with the rhythm. Someone has passed out on a crate, snoring like a saw, and a group of kids are playing a game with chalk lines and stones, shrieking with laughter whenever someone misses their turn. This is what fun looks like in your world, not clean, not quiet, but full of life. You stop at a music hall near the market square. You can't afford a ticket, but the door is half open and the usher is too distracted to notice you loitering. Inside, the place is packed wall-to-wall with people, men in flat caps, women in shawls, children balanced on laps. The air is warm and thick with sweat and smoke, and you catch a glimpse of the stage just as a man leaps across it in a ridiculous costume, doing something between a jig and a fall, and the audience roars with laughter. You grin. Eventually, you make your way back down the street, humming a melody you only half remember, one of those songs that everyone knows but no one can quite trace. You swing your arms, scuff your boots along the curb, and you smile at the old woman who is watching from her window with a mug of tea in her hand. She just nods at you, like she knows exactly where you've been and what it meant. Back home, the lights are low and your family is already half asleep. Your mother asks where you've been, but not harshly. You just say, "Just listening," and she nods. She understands. You settle into bed with a sore throat from singing along outside the pub and a stomach that still growls, but you feel lighter somehow. Entertainment doesn't fill you up like food does, but it feeds something else, something tired and invisible, the part of you that gets lost between the factory hours and the fog. Tonight, it's back. Tomorrow you'll have to rise early again. You'll scrub and sew and hammer and haul. But tonight, you saw Punch hit a crocodile. You heard a woman sing about a stolen horse. You laughed at a joke you didn't quite understand just because everyone else did. And in the middle of it all, for a while, you forgot what it felt like to ache. There's a knock at the door just after sunrise, 3 sharp raps, then silence. No one moves at first. You're still tangled in the scratchy blanket, your face pressed into the mattress, warm for once. But the knock comes again, and this time your mother is already halfway across the room. Her face is tight, her mouth thinner than usual. You sit up slowly, still rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and then suddenly it clicks. Someone has died. You don't know who yet, you don't even need to. It happens all the time. In the tenements, death is more frequent than the news. It comes quietly in the middle of the night, behind thin walls and closed doors. Sometimes it's a baby who never really learned to cry. Sometimes it's a man who coughed for months until he finally didn't. Sometimes it's an old woman who simply stopped waking up. The neighborhood just absorbs it, adjusts, and continues on. There are no grand ceremonies here, no long eulogies or black carriages with velvet trim. There's just a body, a family, and a clock ticking down until the landlord wants the room emptied. This time it's the Jones boy, young, 13 maybe. He worked down at the ironworks until his lungs gave up. Everyone knew it was coming. He'd been coughing up blood for weeks, but it still hits harder than usual. He was a sharp one, that one, always had a joke. He could make a spinning top from an apple core and a nail, but he's gone just like that. Your mother just nods grimly. Then she reaches for the black shawl she keeps tucked away for times like these. She tells you to get dressed quickly. There will be a vigil this evening, nothing fancy, just neighbors gathering, saying something kind, offering a cup of tea, and maybe a slice of bread if the family has anything left. You get dressed slowly. It's hard to shake the weight that death drapes over everything. Even the fog seems heavier today, sagging against the windows like wet cloth. You go about your usual tasks, fetching water, sweeping the hearth, but it all feels dull, like the world has been muffled. And here's your historical fact in Victorian England. Death was a constant presence, especially among the poor. Infant mortality rates were high. Diseases spread quickly through the overcrowded housing, and access to medical care was limited. Life expectancy in the urban working-class neighborhoods could be as low as 30 to 35 years old. Children died from things we can now treat with antibiotics, and adults died from exhaustion, infections, or simply being worn down by years of hard labor. But there's a strange contradiction in it all. Despite death being so common, the Victorians developed elaborate rituals around it. Mourning clothes, funeral customs, even etiquette books about how to grieve properly. There were black crepe ribbons, armbands, veils, mourning rings with hair braided into the band, and post-mortem photography, where the dead were posed as if they were merely asleep. It was a whole industry, a business, even a fashion statement. Of course, most working-class families couldn't afford any of that. Instead, they would pool their resources for a simple pine coffin, maybe borrow a black shawl from a neighbor, maybe say a few words over a candle. That was enough. It had to be. And here's your fringe fact: there were death clubs. Yes, that's what they were called. Working-class families would pay small weekly dues into a shared fund so that when someone died, the club would cover the cost of the burial. It was morbidly practical, a way to die with a shred of dignity in a world that charged you for everything, even your final resting place. That evening, you walked to the Joneses' room with your mother and your sister. The hallway is quieter than usual. No shouting, no gossip, no children banging tin cups on the stair rails, just the shuffling of feet and the low murmur of shared sorrow. Inside, the air is heavy. The boy's body is lying on a narrow table, wrapped in a sheet. His hands are folded over his chest, and his face is pale but peaceful. Someone has placed a wilted daisy beside his head, and there's a candle at each corner. The room is filled with people, neighbors, schoolmates, workmates, and no one speaks loudly. A few are crying, but most aren't. There's not enough left in them for tears. You sit quietly near the window, watching the flame tremble in the draft. Your mother passes around a plate of bread, and your sister pours weak tea. Someone tells a story about how the boy once tricked the milkman into giving him an extra bottle, and laughter ripples through the room, gentle and short. Then the silence returns. Later, you walk home under a moon that looks too clean for a night like this. The fog is clearing, and you can see the stars between the chimneys. Your mother walks slowly, her arms folded, her head down. You want to ask her if she's okay, but you don't. It's not the sort of question that gets asked. Back inside, the fire is out. You curl up in your blanket, still in your day clothes, and you stare at the ceiling. The cracks look different tonight, sharper maybe, or maybe you're just seeing them more clearly. Here's what you know. Death doesn't wait. It doesn't care about age or kindness or potential. It just arrives, takes what it wants, and leaves you to sweep up afterward. But in this life, this narrow, smoky, scraped-together life, people still show up. They still pass around bread. They still tell stories. They still light candles. You close your eyes, listening to the last of the footsteps outside, and you whisper good night to the boy who made you laugh once. Then you sleep, because tomorrow someone still has to go and fetch the water. It hits you somewhere between the alleyway and the butcher's, this sudden awareness of your own stench. Not just the faint sweat of walking or the greasy hint of last night's stew clinging to your coat, but the whole, all-encompassing bouquet of being poor and unwashed in a city that doesn't give you the time or the tools to smell like anything else. You pause for a moment, sniff your sleeve, and wince. It's not terrible, just present. You smell like cold smoke, like wet wool, like stale lard and old bricks, and maybe even last week's laundry water. It's the smell of survival, but it still makes you self-conscious. Your mother once said it was the smell of the city. She said you could close your eyes and know where you were just by sniffing, and she wasn't wrong. Every corner of the neighborhood has its own scent signature. The fishmonger's reeks of salt and scale and decay. The laundry house smells like lye, wet flannel, and steam. The tannery 3 streets over is nothing short of a public nuisance, with the smell of boiled hides, animal fat, and something vaguely chemical that burns your eyes. Then there's you who share a mattress with 3 siblings, who rotate your shirts every few days and your undergarments even less frequently, who bathe when you can, which is to say, not often. You start wondering what strangers smell when they pass you by. Do they wrinkle their noses? Do they step aside because of the fog or because of you? Here's your historical fact. Victorian cities were notoriously pungent, with no centralized sewage in the early half of the century and only intermittent plumbing after that. The streets were rivers of waste, human, animal, and industrial. People bathed infrequently, and their clothes were washed even less. Deodorant, as we know it, didn't exist yet, and perfume was for the wealthy. For the poor, you just masked your odor with vinegar, soap scraps, or a hopeful shrug. It wasn't just the bodies that smelled, it was everything. Your home, full of cold smoke, mildew, damp bedding, and unwashed pots, your clothes, steeped in whatever you brushed past that day. Blood at the slaughterhouse, ink at the printers, flour at the bakery, sewage at the pump. Even your breath carried the scent of your diet: onions, salted fish, strong tea, pickled cabbage. There were no breath mints, just hope. And here's your weird fringe fact. Some Victorian doctors believed that bad smells, miasmas, were the root cause of disease. Before germ theory took hold, it was widely accepted that the air itself, particularly foul air, was what made you sick. There were elaborate public debates about whether certain perfumes or flowers could purify the air. Lavender was especially popular, and so was burning vinegar-soaked cloth. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Still, the obsession with odor created an entire cultural etiquette. Rich people would spray rose water on their handkerchiefs and carry them everywhere to shield their noses from the smell of the street. Women would dab perfume behind their ears, not for allure, but as a defense mechanism. And if a poor person managed to not smell bad, it was immediately noticed. Clean wasn't a baseline, it was a triumph. You think of that now as you duck into the corner shop. The owner, Mr. Highcroft, gives you a long glance but says nothing. He's used to the smells that walk through his door. Everyone smells like something. You queue up behind a man who reeks of fish oil and a woman who smells like damp firewood, and no one flinches. You buy a small bar of soap, not the fancy scented kind, but the harsh yellow kind that strips your skin as well as the grime, and you cradle it like treasure all the way home. There's a bowl of water warming by the stove, not a bath, not even close, but it's enough to rinse your face, your neck, your underarms. You scrape at the grime with a rough cloth and you hum quietly to yourself. The soap bites into your skin and you rinse with cold water, shivering. But when it's done, you smell better, not good, not fresh, but less. You scrape under your nails with a sliver of bone from last week's soup. You change into a shirt that hasn't been worn since Tuesday. Your sister braids your hair tightly and pins it close to your head. You rinse your mouth out with tea that's been sitting for too long. And you rub your boots with a scrap of wax paper to give them the faintest shine. It's not vanity, it's armor. You pass by a group of girls your age outside and one of them nods at you, not a mockery. A real nod, maybe she noticed, maybe she didn't, but still. You go back inside with a strange sort of pride blooming in your chest. Clean isn't something you get, it's something you fight for. You pull the cloth from the stove and you hang it up to dry. It's gray now, but that's fine. The room still smells like boiled onion and wood smoke, but also just faintly like soap. That smell clings to you as you lie down to sleep, and for once your nose doesn't wrinkle. You close your eyes and breathe in deeply. It's no perfume, no roses, but for now you smell like effort, like resilience, like someone who gave a damn. Tomorrow the city will coat you in itself again. It always does, but tonight, just for tonight, you smell like you. You're sweeping the front step when you see them again. The middle-class ladies, 3 of them, with parasols in hand despite the lack of sun. Their skirts swishing like they've never known a puddle. Their gloves so white it's almost insulting. They walk past your street slowly, the way someone walks through a museum, pointing, observing, noticing the broken window here, the hanging laundry there, the half-naked children playing with sticks in the gutter. One of the women whispers something behind her gloved hand, and another one makes a face like she's just caught a whiff of boiled cabbage. You just keep sweeping. You don't meet their eyes. You already know what they think of you. They do this sometimes. These women with time to spare and a curiosity about how the other half lives. Social reformers, charitable do-gooders, or just bored wives looking for a story to tell at their next luncheon. Sometimes they're carrying notebooks, sometimes sketch pads. Today, one of them is carrying a small camera, the kind you've only seen once before, when a man came to take a picture of the fishmonger's stall for the papers. She raises it and points it toward a row of children who are sitting on a stoop. No one asks for their permission. No one smiles. You pause mid-sweep, and you watch them glide past like swans skimming the surface of a grimy canal. They're not here to help, not really. They're here to look, to witness, to say later, "Yes, I saw it with my own eyes, the poverty, the filth, it was ghastly." And then perhaps they'll do something, raise some money, write a pamphlet, host a tea, but most of the time they just vanish back to the clean parts of the city where coal smoke is an aesthetic and hunger is just hypothetical. Here's your historical fact. During the Victorian era, middle-class interest in the working poor was at an all-time high. With the rise of industrial capitalism and rapid urbanization, poverty became increasingly visible and increasingly worrying to those who didn't experience it. Social investigators, journalists, and reformers began venturing into the slums and tenements to document the conditions. Some did it out of genuine concern, others did it for research, and a few did it for entertainment. Henry Mayhew was one of the earliest and most famous chroniclers. His multi-volume work, London Labour and the London Poor, compiled interviews, sketches, and essays detailing the lives of street sellers, beggars, and laborers. He wrote about bone pickers, rat catchers, chimney sweeps, and flower girls, often in great detail. Some called it compassion. Others called it voyeurism. Either way, it sold well. Your fringe fact: there were even guided tours of the London slums for upper-class visitors. They were sometimes called slumming parties. And yes, they were exactly as gross as that sounds. Men and women would dress in their finest, sometimes accompanied by police escorts, and they would stroll through impoverished neighborhoods to witness authentic poverty. It was seen as both charitable and thrilling, like visiting a zoo but with people. You return to your sweeping, the bristles catching on the uneven stone. The ladies are gone now, vanished back up the street, taking your dignity with them. You wonder what they'll say about your street, about your life, whether they noticed your little brother without shoes or your mother's patched shawl, whether they think you're dirty or dangerous or just unfortunate. Inside, your father mutters something about charity workers and their papers full of lies. He's been featured in one, apparently. A sketch of him working at the docks appeared last month in a pamphlet about labor reform. The artist didn't ask, and the article called him stoic. He just calls them vultures. And yet not all of them are bad. Your school teacher, Miss Hartley, is middle class too, but she's different. She walks through the neighborhood with her coat buttoned up tight and her books held close, not like she's slumming, but like she belongs here. She listens more than she talks. She brings bread when someone is sick, and she reads poetry out loud in a voice that makes you want to sit up straighter. She doesn't photograph your poverty. She tries to understand it, and sometimes that feels like enough. You think about the other kind of attention you get, the stories that are written about you, the ones where people like you are characters in cautionary tales or illustrations in newspaper columns. You're either a tragic orphan, a criminal in the making, or just a backdrop for a social experiment. No one writes about your jokes, your singing, or the way you can balance a coal bucket on your head while skipping rope. The good bits never make the cut. That night, your sister draws on the wall with a bit of charcoal, just a doodle, a little face with crooked eyes and a grin. Your mother tells her off half-heartedly, but you all smile anyway. The wall is stained and cracking, but for a moment it feels like it's yours, like it's art. Later, lying in bed, you hear someone in the alley playing a harmonica. You don't know the tune, but it's soft and slow and sounds like rain might sound if it had a voice. You close your eyes and you picture the woman with the camera showing the picture of your neighbor to her friends. You wonder if the photo will be in black and white, with a caption about slum children or the plight of the urban poor. You wonder if she'll remember your face at all, but you also wonder if someone like Miss Hartley will see it, if someone will look closer, past the grime, past the patched coat, past the swept step maybe, just maybe. Someone will see you, not as a story, not as a subject, just you. You hear the shutter click before you even see the man. He's squatting across the street, just behind a leaning stack of firewood, fiddling with a box camera the size of a small suitcase. Next to him stands a boy, no older than 10, wearing a cap that's far too big for his head, and holding a reflector that looks suspiciously like a broken mirror glued to a scrap of wood. They're not from here, you can always tell. Their coats are cleaner, their boots match, the boy's hair is combed. They're photographing the girl who begs outside the bakery, the one with the twisted foot and the ribbon tied around her wrist like it's a bracelet. She's not posing, she just happens to be there, and the man is capturing her like she's part of the scenery. He speaks to her once, asks her to move slightly to the left, and when she doesn't answer, he just takes the picture anyway. The boy writes something down in a little notebook. You feel an odd mixture of anger and embarrassment, the kind that bubbles up when someone points at your worst day and calls it interesting. Later, you pass by the girl. She hasn't moved, but now she's holding the coin the man gave her, maybe a farthing, maybe more. She stares at it like it's a stone, something weightless and heavy at the same time. Here's your historical fact. Photography became increasingly popular and accessible in the latter half of the 19th century, and with it came a new kind of documentary journalism. Street photography captured everything from bustling markets to political protests to urban poverty. Some photographers did it to inspire reform. Others did it to sell postcards. Poverty, it turned out, had an aesthetic. There were entire series of albums labeled London's Comely Street Urchins, The Destitute of Whitechapel, or Faces of the Slums. Some were sympathetic, some were exploitative, but all of them reduced people like you to images, to examples. Your face was turned into a lesson for someone far away, printed and pasted into books or sold for pennies at seaside stands. And here's your fringe fact. Some children were actually paid to look poorer than they actually were. Photographers would stage scenes, ask kids to remove their shoes, mess up their hair, or slump on the steps with just the right expression. They wanted the perfect shot, the balance of grime and innocence, of sadness and resilience, something to make the viewer say, "Oh, those poor children," before turning the page and sipping their tea. Back on your own stoop, you think about how you would look in one of those photos. Not smiling, of course, no one ever smiles in these pictures. The exposure takes too long anyway, 5 or 10 seconds sometimes, but also it just wasn't done. Smiling in the face of hardship would just confuse the message. You'd be too real. You glance at your sister who is playing with the button string you made for her. She's giggling, swinging it like a lasso. Her cheeks are smudged with flour, and her laugh is pure sunshine. And suddenly, you imagine someone photographing that moment, would they? Could they? Probably not. It's not tragic enough. Inside, your mother is fixing the tear in your father's coat. She pricks her finger, but she doesn't flinch. She just dabs the blood on her apron and keeps on sewing. She says nothing about the photographers, but you know she hates them. She was in one of those pictures years ago, a charity pamphlet for a shelter she never actually used. Her face looked tired, and the caption read, "A mother's silent struggle." She never even got a copy. You sit down beside her and you watch the needle flick in and out. She finally speaks, her voice low. They never show the good days, do they? You just shake your head, they don't, because they never catch the moment after a warm meal when everyone is quiet and full and the fire doesn't sputter. They never catch the smile when your father tells a story from his sailor days, or when your brother makes a stupid joke and your mother snorts tea through her nose. They never photograph your hands washing the floor with pride, or your sister's careful braids, or the way your neighbor shares her last 2 eggs just because you look tired. They come for the misery because misery sells. You think of the man behind the lens, crouched and focused, his face blank as he documents someone else's despair. You wonder if he sleeps well. You wonder if he shows the photos to his friends and says, "Look what I saw today," as though it's something he can just put away in a drawer once he's done looking. But here's the thing, you don't get to put this away, you have to live it. Tomorrow, that photo of the girl by the bakery might appear in a pamphlet or a newspaper, or even hang in a gallery, framed and labeled. Someone might point at it and say, What a shame. And then they'll just walk away. Maybe they'll drop a coin in a collection tin. Maybe they'll say a prayer and then they'll forget. But you won't. That night you draw a picture with a stub of charcoal on the wall near your bed. It's not good, your lines are shaky, and the face is too round. But it's a picture of your family, all of you, sitting by the fire, laughing at something only you would understand. No captions, no tears, just you, as you are, a life not curated, not labeled, not sold. The rain starts just as you're drifting off to sleep, soft against the window glass. You wonder if the photographer stayed out long enough to get wet, if his lens fogged up, if he got the shot he wanted. You hope not, because for once, maybe today doesn't belong to him, it belongs to you. You're up early, too early really, but something about the air feels different, not lighter, not cleaner, but softer, like the city took a deep breath and then forgot to exhale. There's no shouting in the street yet, no cartwheels clattering, just the distant, sleepy hum of a milkman's whistle, and the scratch of your mother's needle as she mends your shirt in the corner. You sit still for a while, letting the quiet wrap around you like a borrowed coat. Then you hear it, the low, unmistakable chime of the church bells, not the thunderous, commanding kind from the rich parts of town, but the thinner, cracked ones from St. Giles's over on Gutter Lane. They're late, as usual, and slightly out of tune, but there's something warm in their wobble, a Sunday sound. Sunday, a day of rest, or at least the closest thing you'll ever get to one. Your mother finishes her stitching, gives the shirt a brisk shake, and then hands it to you. "You'll wear this to chapel," she says. It's not a request. You just nod and change quickly. It's still a little loose in the sleeves and tight at the collar, but it's clean and the buttons all match, and that's good enough. Outside, families are already on the move, walking in a slow, steady parade toward the chapel 2 streets over. The girls are in dresses that are too thin for the wind, and the boys are in caps with their ears poking out. The mothers are pulling their gloves on with their teeth while they fix their children's hair with their elbows. Everyone is doing their best to look tidy, respectable, like maybe God won't notice the holes in their boots if they just walk carefully enough. You fall in line, walking with your mother and your siblings, trying not to trip on the uneven cobblestones. The street smells faintly of smoke and stewed carrots, and someone is airing out a rug from an upstairs window. Dust falls like confetti. At the chapel door, a man with hands like bark gives each of you a nod and a paper sheet with the hymn list. You fold it carefully, even though you know all the songs by heart. Inside, the benches are hard and the floorboards creak like they're complaining about having to be awake. There's no stained glass here, no candles, just whitewashed walls and the sour scent of old wood in colder mornings. Here's your historical fact for many Victorians, especially the poor. Sunday was the one guaranteed pause in the week, a day when the machines stopped, the shops closed, and the streets quieted down. The Sabbath was taken very seriously, and laws known as blue laws restricted business and labor. Children were scrubbed, boots were shined, and everyone, regardless of their belief, felt the pressure to attend church. Respectability was a currency, and Sundays were the showroom. You sit stiffly on the bench, your knees knocking against the wood in front of you. The preacher climbs up into the pulpit and begins his sermon. His voice is slow, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You lose track of the words after a while, something about grace, Something about fire, something about being grateful. You just stare at a cobweb that's high up in the corner and you wonder how it got all the way up there. Then the singing starts, and it's your favorite part, not because you like the hymns, though some of them are decent, but because this is the only time you get to make noise that isn't for working or for apologizing. Everyone lifts their voices together, out of tune, offbeat, and too loud. It's terrible and it's beautiful. And here's your fringe fact: some churches in poorer neighborhoods used loaner boots. For children who didn't have any shoes, the chapel would keep a few extra pairs at the entrance so they wouldn't have to walk in barefoot and embarrass themselves. You remember using them once. They were stiff leather and 2 sizes too big, but for one morning you felt like someone else. After the service, there's a brief social hum. Neighbors exchange nods and quiet gossip is slipped between prayers. You overhear Mrs. Perkins telling someone that her niece has caught typhoid, and Mr. Ellis is talking about a missing chicken, all under the watchful eye of the preacher who stands like a crow on a fence post, trying to decide whether he should bless you or scold you. Back home, the table is already set. Your mother has saved something special for today. Potatoes roasted with drippings, bread soaked in gravy, and the rarest of treats, an egg shared between the 3 of you like it's the crown jewels. You eat slowly, chewing the warmth into your bones. After the meal, the rest of the day stretches out ahead of you like a soft road. There's no shift at the mill, no errands to run, no coal to fetch. You sit by the window with your sister and you play a quiet game with a piece of string. Your brother draws something in the soot on the windowsill. Your father smokes his pipe and hums a song that sounds suspiciously like a sea shanty, though he'll never admit it. You spend part of the afternoon helping Mrs. Tanner next door with her washing, not because you have to, but because she's old and her back is going, and you know what it feels like to do something hard all alone. She thanks you with a sweet that tastes vaguely of aniseed and possibly soap, but you eat it anyway. Later, when the sun dips low and the street turns blue with evening, you go for a walk, not far, just to the end of the alley and back. The air smells of coal and chimney smoke and the faintest hint of baked apples from someone's oven. You take a few deep breaths and you try to remember this feeling. This quiet, unhurried, barely scraped together day is what passes for peace. Tomorrow the city will start all over again, the boots on the stone, the bellows from the factory, the cold mornings and the colder hands. But for now, the fire is warm, the bread is gone, and your sister has fallen asleep with her head on your shoulder. You look out the window and you think, not for the first time, that maybe this is enough. Maybe this one day, the stillness, the softness, the absence of having to fight for every single moment is worth something sacred. You close your eyes, and for once, you don't dream of escape, you just sleep. And now the fire is just embers, soft and glowing like sleepy eyes in the dark. You've curled up on your thin mattress with a scratchy blanket tucked around your shoulders, and the weight of the day is still resting somewhere in your bones, but in a good way, in a way that says you did it. You made it through. Through the soot and the shouting, through the clatter and the cold, through one more ordinary day in a life that might look small to the world but feels big to you, because it is big. Every little moment is stretched out like a thread, stitched together into something that means more than people looking in from the outside could ever possibly understand. Outside, the city finally quiets down. The carts have stopped rolling. The street singers have packed up their songs, and even the rats are less enthusiastic. Somewhere in the alley, a door creaks, and then the silence takes over, slow and absolute. You can hear your brother breathing nearby, soft and rhythmic. Your mother shifts in her chair once, then she stills and the fire sighs. You think back on everything you've seen, the fog so thick you could just disappear in it, the work that bent your back and blistered your palms, the soup stretched with hope and bone, the stories whispered across the stoops and behind the closed doors. And in all of it, somehow, you were there, just trying, just making it through. Maybe no one wrote your name down. Maybe no one snapped a picture or carved your face in stone. But you were real. You are real. Your living history, tucked into the corners, standing in the queues, laughing even when no one said anything funny. You, this version of you that lived through the soot and the soup lines and the Sunday hymns, will never make it into the textbooks. But you're here, etched in memory, in the cold dust and the cracked hands and the second-hand boots, a survivor of the ordinary. So now it's time to rest. Let your muscles unwind. Let your breath slow down. Let the last thoughts of the fog and the factory fade out of your mind like a street lamp flickering out in the distance. You don't need to worry about tomorrow just yet. The city can wait. The work will still be there. But tonight, you've earned the silence. Just breathe. Let the weight of the covers anchor you gently. Let the dark be soft instead of empty. Let your heart slow to the rhythm of the creaky floorboards and the quiet dreams. You're safe. You're warm enough and you're not alone. Tomorrow you'll rise again, but for now, you rest.